This happened during a road trip I took last year in late summer. I was taking the scenic route back after spending some time with some family members. I had been driving roughly 4 hours a day, stopping in different towns along the way. This part of the trip came after my final visit. The last stretch, about 8 hours of driving, was nothing but endless forest. There was one more city I had considered passing through, but it was way too far off course to make the detour worth it. I had left my last stop around 6 p.m. to head toward a small cabin I reserved through a rental app. It was just over 2 hours away and conveniently located along my route back, which is why I picked it. I figured it would be a better choice than crashing in one of those sketchy roadside motels. The area I was passing through was mostly flatland, though there were plenty of trees scattered all around. As I pulled up to the cabin, I noticed someone had lined up tall pine trees neatly in front of the place, with a gravel path winding between them leading to the door. Honestly, the way it looked from the outside, with the trees and the quiet setting, gave me an uneasy feeling. I parked and used a code I'd received via email to unlock a padlock on the door. Despite how it looked from the outside, the inside of the cabin had clearly been updated recently, probably turned into a vacation rental. It was small but really warm and comfortable. I didn't bring in much since I was just staying for the night. I sat at the little table and ate the fast food I'd grabbed earlier. But barely 10 minutes after I'd gotten comfortable, there was a knock on the door. It made me jump because I hadn't heard any vehicle roll up, or even the sound of someone walking nearby. I got up and opened the door. A man stood there who looked to be in his early 40s. Bald head, beard mostly gray with some black still in it. "Hey there, just wanted to check that you made it in okay and everything's good," he said with a friendly grin. Figuring it must be the host, I told him everything was fine and thanked him. I said goodnight and closed the door. It did strike me as weird that he showed up without letting me know ahead of time, just to ask how things were going. But I assumed maybe he lived close by, maybe in a separate house on the same land or something. One thing I noticed was how strong his smell was. It was the kind of stink someone might have after working outside in the heat all day. I found it a little odd, but I shrugged it off. I went back to the table to finish my food, then took a shower to relax for the night. I wasn't in there long, maybe 5 minutes, before I started feeling really tired and just wanted to lie down. After drying off, I climbed into bed and scrolled on my phone a bit. That's when I heard another knock at the door. Just like the first time, it startled me, especially since, again, I hadn't heard a car or footsteps. It had to be that same guy again. But why would he come back so soon? The whole thing felt off and it made me uneasy. I checked my phone to see if he had messaged or called, but nothing was there. I walked slowly into the main area while hearing several more knocks. I stood there debating whether I should answer or just ignore it. Eventually, I called out through the door, asking what he wanted. He paused, then replied, "Would you mind opening the door? I just have one more quick thing to ask." I didn't answer right away. I was honestly unsure what to say. After a short silence, he knocked again and asked me once more to open up. I told him it was late and unless there was some emergency, I'd prefer to be left alone for the night. After that, there was a long stretch of complete silence. It wasn't just quiet, it felt off. When a full minute passed and I still heard nothing, I started getting nervous. I hadn't heard him leave. Was he still standing right there? I crept closer and peeked through the small window on the door. No one was there. Right away, I assumed he must have sneaked off quietly, because walking away on that gravel should have made some noise. But where did he go? My chest tightened. Something didn't feel right. Why was he acting like this? I stayed near the door, not moving, just listening. I was too uneasy to go back to bed. That's when I happened to glance toward one of the front windows. His eyes were staring straight at me through the glass. I panicked, turned, and sprinted into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the call, I could hear something, like he was trying to lift the window open. That sound alone was enough to make my stomach drop. But even worse was the realization that something didn't add up. If he was the host, he should have had keys to his own place. Why would he try getting in through a window? That's when it finally hit me. He wasn't the owner. This was later confirmed when officers arrived. By then, the man had taken off. No one knew which way he went. The real host, the actual property owner, was eventually reached, and they had no idea who the man could have been. I still don't know what that guy wanted. It's obvious he had lied, and he was probably planning something terrible. I'm just thankful I trusted my instincts and didn't open the door a second time. I live in central Idaho, right on the edge of a quiet highway town. There isn't much here, just a couple of shops, a gas station or two, and a cheap motel lined up along the main road. The paths that go out toward the edges of town are mostly unpaved, leading to a handful of houses and some large, private plots with woods and open grassy land. It was a normal day for me. I work from home and usually wrap things up by around 6 o'clock in the evening. That day was no different. After finishing up my work, I headed into town to grab a few groceries and restock on household stuff. Even though we live right on a highway, it's never really busy, so most of the stores are pretty quiet no matter the time of day. I pulled into the small market and started picking out what I needed. While I was walking through one of the aisles, I noticed a man watching me. At first, I figured it was just a weird coincidence. I probably turned my head just as he was glancing in my direction. I didn't give it much more thought and kept going with my shopping. But a few minutes later, in a completely different part of the store, I spotted him again. He came down the same empty aisle I was in and stood about 5 or 6 feet away from me, off to the side. I kept my attention forward, scanning the shelves for what I needed, but I started to notice he wasn't really doing anything. He wasn't picking anything up or even looking around. Without turning my head, I shifted my eyes over just enough to see him better out of the corner of my vision. He was definitely watching me this time. I quietly said hello and went on with what I was doing. He didn't respond. I grabbed what I needed a little faster and left the aisle. I just chalked it up to him being a strange guy and tried not to dwell on it. I checked out at the front and walked out toward my car, which I usually park in the far end of the lot. After loading everything into my trunk, I got into the driver's seat. As I looked up, something didn't sit right with me. There were maybe 30 or 40 other cars scattered around the lot, but the feeling in my chest was off. Then I spotted him again. He was standing between 2 vehicles on the far side, facing in my direction. What stood out right away was that he didn't have anything in his hands. No shopping bags. Nothing. I was pretty sure he hadn't even gone to the register. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just some tired driver passing through. Probably a long-haul trucker running on barely any sleep. Either way, I didn't want anything to do with him. I left the lot and drove back toward home. The sun was mostly down by then, and the dirt road back to my place was dim and silent. I pulled up in front of the house and carried in the first few grocery bags. While I was putting them away, my dad called, and I got sidetracked for a bit talking with him. Once I was off the phone, I went back outside to grab the rest of the groceries from the trunk. That's when I saw something. I had to squint and let my eyes adjust to the dark, but just off to the side of the dirt road, I noticed a pickup truck. Its lights were off, and I could only make out the outline against the night sky. I own close to 40 acres of land, and that truck was definitely parked within my property line. I knew it wasn't there when I pulled in earlier, and even if someone had just pulled off to rest, why would they be parked in the dark with no lights? I moved slowly toward my car, keeping a close eye on the truck while I grabbed the rest of my groceries. The most harmless explanation I could think of was that someone had pulled off the main road to sleep for the night instead of spending money on a motel. Even though it was technically trespassing, I wasn't going to start a confrontation if I didn't have to. You never know who might be inside a vehicle, and it's better not to provoke anything. I brought the bags inside and closed the door behind me. I pulled the curtain open on the front window so I could keep watch just in case. Over the next hour or so, my nerves started to settle. I told myself it was probably just someone sleeping in their car. Still weird, but not dangerous. I spent another hour in the living room watching TV. The truck never moved. Eventually, I got tired, closed the curtain again, and headed upstairs to bed. I think I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime during the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I didn't check the clock, but I'd guess it was around 2:30 or so. I got out of bed half asleep, crossed the room, and stepped into the hallway toward the bathroom. As I opened the bathroom door, I heard a faint creak downstairs. That had never happened before. I paused and listened, then gently closed and opened the door again, wondering if it was just an odd noise from the hinges. Nothing. I walked to the end of the hall and looked down the staircase. Everything below was dark, except for a little moonlight coming in through the kitchen windows. That's when I noticed something. Movement in the downstairs hallway. A shadow was shifting very slightly across the far wall. I couldn't tell if the figure was inside the hallway or if they were outside the back door, with the light casting their shadow through the window. But my heart started racing. I slowly backed away and went into my room, closing the door gently so I wouldn't make a sound. I grabbed my phone and called the police, speaking quietly into the phone. For the first few minutes, I didn't hear anything. I started to wonder if I had imagined it. Then, faintly, I heard the creaking again. Soft, slow footsteps across the floor downstairs. It sounded like they were in the living room. Within another minute, I saw the flashing lights of a police car through my upstairs window. Suddenly, I heard fast footsteps. Whoever it was running across the downstairs floor. Then the sound of the front door swinging open. The police officers caught him just in time, chasing him down as he tried to run across the property toward that same truck I had seen earlier. I recognized him right away. It was the same man from the store. Turned out he had been following me. Even worse, he had managed to get inside my house while I was still awake and moving around. He was carrying a weapon. He told the officers that he only planned to rob the house, but that didn't really line up with how he behaved. He hadn't touched a single thing in the house. He didn't even have a bag to carry anything with, and he knew I was home. Most likely, he'd been watching the house from outside for hours before he even came in. Whatever he was really planning to do, I'd rather not know. It was spring break and I had just turned 19. That year my family took a trip to a quiet cabin up in northern Wisconsin. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother who was 6 at the time. We were supposed to spend the whole week at the cabin. Part of the reason for the trip was to look around some small towns and maybe find a place we'd consider moving to later on. The cabin my mom had rented was one we hadn't seen before, and I don't think she realized how far it really was from any town or grocery store. She was probably more focused on the low price. It was tucked way up north, maybe 40 minutes or so from the nearest store. I guess it gave us a chance to see how we do living far from everything. The drive took a little more than 10 hours. I drove for the first half and my mom handled the rest. We pulled up to the cabin just as the sun was going down. It was beautiful. The sky was glowing orange behind all the thick trees and scattered deer. Way different than the crowded city life we were used to. The cabin itself looked old, though. Every step on the floor made a noise, and the place didn't seem like it was built by anyone professional. But it worked fine. After all, it was just a cabin. We got settled in for the night. We tried out the wood stove and rested from the long trip. I ended up falling asleep for most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8 o'clock, but since I had napped so long, I stayed up a bit later. My little brother had already gone to his room, so I was alone in the main area. I sat by the fire with my phone for a while. Then I figured I'd step outside and get some air, maybe check out the little porch behind the cabin. It was a small wooden deck with a rough-looking fire ring in the middle and a few old chairs around it. I sat and looked out over the woods. It was really quiet. No traffic, no sirens. Just the occasional sound of a bird in the distance and the trees swaying. I loved the peace, but being this far north, it was colder than I expected. I noticed a pile of firewood stacked on the side of the cabin and figured I'd try using the fire pit. It lit without a problem, and the flames stayed right in the center, so I guess it wasn't as unsafe as it looked. I sat out there for a good while. This wasn't something I got to do often, so I really enjoyed it. Then, after maybe half an hour, I suddenly heard a loud sound from the woods. Came out of nowhere. I had no idea what it could be, but the way it echoed, it reminded me of something like an axe hitting a log or tree. It was just one loud hit, though, and I figured it couldn't really be someone out there. It was so dark, and we were way out in the middle of nowhere. Still, it sounded close. And for the next few minutes, I sat there, but the calm feeling I had before was gone. I started getting that uneasy feeling you get when something's off. I eventually put the fire out and headed back inside. From what I could tell, both my mom and brother were already asleep. But I wasn't tired anymore. I didn't know if it was the nap or that noise that snapped me out of it. But either way, I didn't feel like sleeping. I stayed in the living room on my phone for a while. I had some movies saved on it, so I didn't need any signal or Wi-Fi. About 15 minutes in, I heard something. I paused the movie to listen. I wasn't sure if it was the floor creaking from someone getting up or maybe just the wind pushing against the walls. But it gave me that same feeling again. I wasn't used to being in this kind of quiet and remote place, so every sound got to me. Then a minute later, I heard another noise. But this time it came from the other end of the cabin, not near the bedrooms. It was outside the wall beside me, and the only thing on that wall was a window. I leaned a bit closer to listen, and right then, before I could really focus, there was a loud banging on the front door. It rattled the whole wall and made my chest tighten. I froze. Then I heard my mom get out of bed and come into the hall asking what that was. I was already standing by then, knowing this wasn't normal. I told her someone was at the door. She looked scared too. She quickly grabbed her phone and went to call 911. There was no reason at all for someone to be knocking on our cabin in the middle of nowhere this late at night. While she was on the call, I went up to the door and looked through the peephole. There were no outside lights, so it was really hard to see, but I could make out the figure of a man standing close. He was just staring at the door, and in the dark, I could barely see the shape of a large wooden axe in his hand. My heart started racing. I tried to think of any reason why this wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe he was lost or needed help, but nothing really made sense. The man knocked again, harder this time. My mom was still on the phone with emergency services, explaining what was going on, but he didn't say anything. He never spoke, he just kept knocking like he wanted to get in. Time felt strange then, like it was dragging. But before long, he did exactly what we were scared he would. There was a loud hit, and the blade of the axe cracked through the front door. Just a little, but enough to know he was serious. We all ran to the back room and locked the door. We heard a few more loud hits, maybe 4 or 5, and then nothing. We had no idea if he had broken through or walked off. We just stayed hidden and waited. It took around 13 or 14 minutes before the first officer pulled up, which was quicker than we thought it would be considering how far out we were. The door had deep marks in it, but he hadn't made it inside, and there weren't any signs of where he had gone. They think he might have been somewhere in the woods and noticed the fire I made. Maybe it led him to the cabin, but that doesn't explain why he was out there with an axe in the middle of the night, or why he never said a word. We left right after that, and in case you're wondering, we never moved to that area either. It was spring break and I had just turned 19. That year my family took a trip to a quiet cabin up in northern Wisconsin. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother who was 6 at the time. We were supposed to spend the whole week at the cabin. Part of the reason for the trip was to look around some small towns and maybe find a place we'd consider moving to later on. The cabin my mom had rented was one we hadn't seen before, and I don't think she realized how far it really was from any town or grocery store. She was probably more focused on the low price. It was tucked way up north, maybe 40 minutes or so from the nearest store. I guess it gave us a chance to see how we do living far from everything. The drive took a little more than 10 hours. I drove for the first half and my mom handled the rest. We pulled up to the cabin just as the sun was going down. It was beautiful. The sky was glowing orange behind all the thick trees and scattered deer. Way different than the crowded city life we were used to. The cabin itself looked old, though. Every step on the floor made a noise, and the place didn't seem like it was built by anyone professional. But it worked fine. After all, it was just a cabin. We got settled in for the night. We tried out the wood stove and rested from the long trip. I ended up falling asleep for most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8 o'clock, but since I had napped so long, I stayed up a bit later. My little brother had already gone to his room, so I was alone in the main area. I sat by the fire with my phone for a while. Then I figured I'd step outside and get some air, maybe check out the little porch behind the cabin. It was a small wooden deck with a rough-looking fire ring in the middle and a few old chairs around it. I sat and looked out over the woods. It was really quiet. No traffic, no sirens. Just the occasional sound of a bird in the distance and the trees swaying. I loved the peace, but being this far north, it was colder than I expected. I noticed a pile of firewood stacked on the side of the cabin and figured I'd try using the fire pit. It lit without a problem, and the flame stayed right in the center, so I guess it wasn't as unsafe as it looked. I sat out there for a good while. This wasn't something I got to do often, so I really enjoyed it. Then, after maybe half an hour, I suddenly heard a loud sound from the woods. Came out of nowhere. I had no idea what it could be, but the way it echoed, it reminded me of something like an axe hitting a log or tree. It was just one loud hit, though, and I figured it couldn't really be someone out there. It was so dark, and we were way out in the middle of nowhere. Still, it sounded close, and for the next few minutes, I sat there, but the calm feeling I had before was gone. I started getting that uneasy feeling you get when something's off. I eventually put the fire out and headed back inside. From what I could tell, both my mom and brother were already asleep. But I wasn't tired anymore. I didn't know if it was the nap or that noise that snapped me out of it. But either way, I didn't feel like sleeping. I stayed in the living room on my phone for a while. I had some movies saved on it, so I didn't need any signal or Wi-Fi. About 15 minutes in, I heard something. I paused the movie to listen. I wasn't sure if it was the floor creaking from someone getting up or maybe just the wind pushing against the walls. But it gave me that same feeling again. I wasn't used to being in this kind of quiet and remote place, so every sound got to me. Then a minute later, I heard another noise. But this time it came from the other end of the cabin, not near the bedrooms. It was outside the wall beside me, and the only thing on that wall was a window. I leaned a bit closer to listen, and right then, before I could really focus, there was a loud banging on the front door. It rattled the whole wall and made my chest tighten. I froze. Then I heard my mom get out of bed and come into the hall asking what that was. I was already standing by then, knowing this wasn't normal. I told her someone was at the door. She looked scared too. She quickly grabbed her phone and went to call 911. There was no reason at all for someone to be knocking on our cabin in the middle of nowhere this late at night. While she was on the call, I went up to the door and looked through the peephole. There were no outside lights, so it was really hard to see. But I could make out the figure of a man standing close. He was just staring at the door, and in the dark, I could barely see the shape of a large wooden axe in his hand. My heart started racing. I tried to think of any reason why this wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe he was lost or needed help, but nothing really made sense. The man knocked again, harder this time. My mom was still on the phone with emergency services, explaining what was going on. But he didn't say anything. He never spoke, he just kept knocking like he wanted to get in. Time felt strange then, like it was dragging. But before long, he did exactly what we were scared he would. There was a loud hit, and the blade of the axe cracked through the front door. Just a little, but enough to know he was serious. We all ran to the back room and locked the door. We heard a few more loud hits, maybe 4 or 5, and then nothing. We had no idea if he had broken through or walked off. We just stayed hidden and waited. It took around 13 or 14 minutes before the first officer pulled up, which was quicker than we thought it would be considering how far out we were. The door had deep marks in it, but he hadn't made it inside, and there weren't any signs of where he had gone. They think he might have been somewhere in the woods and noticed the fire I made. Maybe it led him to the cabin, but that doesn't explain why he was out there with an axe in the middle of the night, or why he never said a word. We left right after that, and in case you're wondering, we never moved to that area either. That night, I was living at the edge of a large nature reserve in a worn-down little cabin. Saying it was out of the way doesn't really cover it. The only way to get there was a narrow, 4-mile path made of dirt and loose rocks, curving through dense woods. The road was hardly wide enough for one vehicle. In some spots, the trees on both sides were so thick it felt like driving through a tunnel made of dry, bare limbs. There weren't any light poles, no other homes, and no phone signal. It was just me, the woods, and whatever else lived out there. The cabin was basic, no lights, no power, and, worst of all, no lock on the door. The person who owned it refused to let anything be changed, said they wanted to keep it true to nature. At first, I didn't mind. I had grown up in a rural part of the state, so being off-grid didn't bother me too much. My roommate, though, was from the city and was working with the forest program as part of a short-term assignment. He brushed off the door thing like it was nothing. Said something like, "What's going to break in? Raccoons?" I didn't find it funny. It began with sounds during the night. At first, I chalked it up to normal animals. We were deep in wild territory after all. But the noises weren't random rustles or wind-blown leaves. No, this was something different. It was slow, heavy, footsteps, crunching on dry leaves. I tried to believe it was just my nerves or maybe a stray deer or even a wandering pig. But the noise happened more than once and always the same way. It would start off far away, out in the dark trees, moving with steady, slow steps. It never ran. It didn't hurry. It just walked. Then always it would pause, right in the thickest parts of the brush, where I couldn't see even a few feet past the tangled branches. I'd stay quiet, barely breathing. Sometimes there would be complete silence, not even bugs or wind, and it would stretch on so long I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing. But other times I could swear I heard breathing. Not a small animal sniffing, not the snort of a hog. This was deeper, heavier, like something large. Then nothing. Minutes, maybe an hour would pass. Then, just as I'd start to calm down, the footsteps would return. Only now they were closer. It got to me in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't just fear from sounds. It was a feeling that clung to me, like I was being looked at all the time, like something out there was aware of me. Even in the daytime, it didn't let up. What used to feel peaceful, open space, trees, quiet, suddenly felt tight and closed in. The trees looked taller. The shadows stayed longer. I couldn't step outside without that crawling feeling on the back of my neck. And then, of course, there was the door. No lock. That detail started eating away at me every night. While the sounds outside got more common, my mind would run wild. What if this wasn't a deer? What if I wasn't just hearing things? What if, one of these nights, that thing came right through the door? I started sleeping in my car. It wasn't much, but it felt like a layer of safety, even if it was just in my head. I'd park a bit over a field away from the cabin, thinking maybe the space would help. But it didn't. The sounds kept happening. And then one night, it all came to a head. I'll never forget it. It was late, well after midnight. I was lying in the driver's seat, reclined, a blanket pulled over me. That's when I heard the noise again. Steady, slow steps moving over the dry ground. But this time, they didn't stop at the edge of the woods. They came forward. I sat upright, barely breathing. It was one of those dark nights where there's no moon, just pitch black outside. I couldn't see a thing through the windshield, but I could hear. A branch cracked. Then, right beside my car, I heard it. Deep, labored breathing. Panicked. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my keys. I finally got them into the ignition. When the headlights switched on, they showed nothing. Nothing but trees and open ground. I threw the car into reverse and got the hell away from that place. By sunrise, I had all my stuff packed and was long gone. My roommate, still thinking I was being paranoid, stayed behind. But he didn't last more than a few weeks. He got hit by burglars twice. After the second time, he finally set up cameras with motion detection. What they caught made me sick. There was a man with a long coat, crouched in the shrubs, watching the cabin. Watching me. Again, I was just 7 when my dad, Martin, took my older brother Daniel and me out to a small cabin way out in the Welsh countryside for a week-long break. We brought our tabby cat too. His name was Boots. The place was cozy but very cut off from everything, buried deep in thick forest, and a long way from the nearest town. The bedrooms were all upstairs, and mine was the furthest away from the rest, placed right where the forest line began. Just beside my bed was one narrow window that looked out toward a twisted old tree I tried and failed to climb the day before. There were no blinds or curtains to keep the night out. That one night I couldn't sleep. I missed home. Boots was curled beside me while I tried to distract myself with a comic book, using a flashlight under the covers. It was close to 2 a.m. when I heard a quiet tapping on the window. I figured at first it must be a branch moving in the wind, but then it started to sound more like a specific rhythm, like someone lightly knocking their knuckles on the glass. Then came the whisper, "Let me in, mate. It's your dad." The voice drifted from just outside the window. My whole body froze. Fear like ice rushed through me. I knew that wasn't my father. I wanted to yell, but I was too scared to make a sound. "It's freezing out here, Leo. Let me inside." The voice continued, soft and steady. "I just need a hug. That's all." I turned toward the window, grabbing hold of Boots. I could feel his fur stiffen up under my hands, and then he let out a deep hiss straight toward the glass. I pressed my face into his side, hoping that whoever it was would give up and leave. Then I heard something I can never forget. A horrible, screeching sound, like metal scraping over glass. I turned my head just a little, just enough to see. There was a face staring in, grinning too wide, almost like it wasn't real. The eyes had this cold, hateful shine in them, and the man outside dragged a small blade slowly across the window, making that chilling sound. That's when I finally managed to scream. His grin dropped instantly into a look of rage and shock. His eyes locked with mine for a second, then snapped toward the door. My dad burst into the room holding his old hunting gun. My brother was right behind him with his cricket bat raised. The man outside, now visibly panicked, stumbled backward. I heard him hit the ground just below the window. My father rushed over and got there just in time to see the shadowy figure vanish into the trees. None of us got a wink of sleep that night. Dad sat by the window, his hunting knife now in hand, while my brother stayed on the bed with me. The police showed up the following morning. They photographed the scratch marks across the glass and the footprints in the snow under my window. They said they'd keep watch in the area, but we packed up and left that day, and we never went back. They never found the man. Even now, I can still remember that voice, gentle but sly, like someone trying to trick a child into opening the door. Sometimes, I still think I hear the crunch of footsteps in fresh snow. And sometimes, I hear that voice calling out to me. Boots is 14 now, still full of attitude, and always ready to growl if something's off. That night, he didn't stop hissing until the man was gone. And ever since then, I always make sure every window is locked, twice. All of these events happened across nearly 3 years, starting in 2013, when I moved into an old cabin. A friend I'd known since we were little asked if I wanted to split the place with her. Since I needed to move out of my folks' home, and she didn't want to cover rent alone, it made sense. The cabin itself dated back to sometime in the late 1700s, though we could never confirm the exact year. The road where it sat carried the last name of the original owners, a once wealthy family who made their money farming tobacco and held control over a large stretch of what is now one of America's major metro areas. If you search up photos of colonial American cabins, you'll see ones that look just like it. At first, we wondered if the place might have been quarters for enslaved people, but after digging into the history more, we figured it had likely been a stable building. That theory made more sense, especially after our dog once dug up an old horseshoe in the backyard. I still keep it to this day. The very night we settled in, I picked up on something strange. There was an oddness in the air. The house had a lot of unusual features. There weren't any doors leading up to the second level, where my bedroom was, or to the lower bedroom where my roommate stayed. Her room had been added on in the late 1980s. Before that, the house hadn't even had a kitchen or a bathroom. The previous owners added both, but the original structure had none. Now that you know what the place was like, here's why I'm sharing all this. Not long after I moved in, I started having this constant feeling like something was watching me. The inside of the cabin was always cold and gloomy and had this dampness that reminded me of a basement. Sure, with a house that old, that kind of feeling could be expected, but this was different. It began with a scratching sound. Every night, I'd wake up hearing what sounded like scratching just beneath the head of my bed. At first, I assumed it was mice, but when I paid closer attention, it wasn't the random noise you'd expect from rodents. It was longer, slower, more purposeful. It sounded like something was dragging across the wood about a foot long, over and over again. I'd just pull the blanket over my head, cover my ears, and shut my eyes. I was 24 back then, but I felt like a terrified little kid. I had no interest in dealing with whatever was under there. One night, I was still awake when I heard it start. The sound began on the far side of the room, above my head. Then it slowly moved down the wall, scratched directly beneath my bed, across the floor, back to the wall, and vanished. Here's why it couldn't have been a mouse. The walls were made from solid logs. What you saw on the outside was exactly what was inside. There was no space between the walls or between the floorboards and the ceiling below. It was a sturdy, old-school structure. Eventually, I got so rattled I began sleeping downstairs. My roommate asked what was going on, and I explained. She confessed she had also been hearing the same sort of scratching, only when she was alone in the house. All of this had happened within the first week. Here's when things really turned strange. When we first arrived, I had to go around removing screws from all the windows. The last person who lived there had screwed them shut. One of the outer doors was also sealed up with screws. I had to take that off too. Inside, we found what we thought was some kind of rabbit food stored in the oven, and piles of junk mail addressed to someone who clearly hadn't gone out much. There were hundreds of catalogs from random companies. We joked that the guy had been a recluse or maybe into something creepy. Looking back, I don't think we were far off. We started sleeping together in the living room downstairs. Being near each other seemed to help, and the weird vibe wasn't as strong when we were in the same room. That worked until I had this strange dream. In the dream, I could see myself asleep, like I was watching from above. Some dark force was approaching me. As it got closer, this terrible pressure built up inside my skull, and there was this awful high-pitched tone in my ears. The sensation was so intense, I suddenly shot upright in bed. The second I did, the TV clicked off on its own. Now, we had already noticed that the TV would sometimes act up, turning on and off, but this time felt different. I know I turned it off before bed. So why was it on at all? After that night, we moved into her bedroom together. She claimed nothing strange had ever happened in there. Maybe because it was built much later, I don't know. Whatever it was that haunted that place had a strange way of bringing us closer. We've been married 5 years now and are hoping to start a family soon. One afternoon, I was upstairs reading and dozing off. The window beside me began to open and shut on its own. That was it. I was done with this thing. The following day, I set the same scene again, just to be sure. The same thing happened, window opening, then slamming shut again. Funny how it only did it when I was around. So I finally snapped. I shouted at whatever it was to knock it off, told it I was fed up and to leave us alone. And for a while, it seemed to listen. But then, every time my wife would leave the house and I was alone, alarm clocks would go off for no reason. Drawers would open by themselves. Loud knocking sounds would echo from the front door. As time went by, though, the activity faded. I think that as I got older, it just started to mess with me less. Nowadays, the house belongs to my in-laws. They were the landlords back then. Now the place feels warm and welcoming. I can be there alone and not feel any of that dread I once did. The cabin is still part of the family, and my mother-in-law has no intention of selling it. I've gone from being some 20-something jerk to being the guy who clears out gutters and organizes fixes for the old house. I've grown to really love that cabin and everything it gave me. When my father-in-law died, I stayed there by myself for a little while, hoping maybe I'd hear something familiar. A knock, a sound, but it never came. Now, when I visit, there's no fear, just calm. I think whatever was there didn't plan to haunt us forever. Maybe it was more like a protective presence, like a strict babysitter waiting for us to grow up. It always seemed to focus more on me than on my wife. Maybe I was just more open to it somehow. But we both saw things. I've always felt more in touch with unexplainable stuff than she has. My mother swears she saw something once, and I think that kind of awareness runs on my side of the family. We never had long talks about it, but over time, stories started to come out. Most of them were harmless. I guess we're just a family that notices things other people don't. There's always been something about the forest that pulls me in. It can make you feel a bunch of different emotions all at the same time. Those long lines of trees that stretch on forever, they all look exactly alike, but somehow you still know each one is its own thing. The way the thick layer of leaves above you blocks out the daylight while also wrapping you in this quiet, hidden world. When I was younger, that's where we lived, in a way. That was where we spent every spare hour. Nothing really mattered too much as long as we made it back before supper. The rest of the day belonged to us. I can honestly say some of the best memories I have come from that time. But there's one day, just one, that I still think about even now, all these years later. It's the only day that still stands out, like it just happened. We knew those woods near our neighborhood like the backs of our hands. We'd walked through so much of it that it felt like we'd been over every inch. Nobody really had a clue how big it was. That wasn't something kids asked or thought about. We just grouped up and went wherever the day took us. We had our own markers. The big old pine stump meant we were 5 minutes from home. The meadow was 10. The busted up little shed meant we were 20 out. No one ever wrote it down or said it out loud. We just knew it from doing it so many times. On this one particular afternoon, a bunch of us ended up heading out deeper than usual. No one suggested it or made a plan to go further. It just sort of happened naturally. We passed all the usual spots, laughing and messing around, pushing forward like we always did. The trees kept flying by. Nothing seemed unusual until we stepped into this open space. We all stopped at the same time. The noise, the talking, all of it cut off in a second. Something didn't feel right. None of us could place the spot. It was like the trees had suddenly vanished, and there was this strange, perfect square-shaped clearing in front of us. Right in the center of it was a cabin. A regular-looking log cabin, the kind you see in old cartoons or in backwoods towns, but this one was different. It looked like it had been in a fire, burned halfway down, barely standing. Maybe my memory is exaggerating, but I could almost smell the smoke and ash even then. We walked toward it without saying anything. No one wanted to be the one to step back, but none of us dared go ahead on our own either. The door, or what was left of it, leaned to the side, barely hanging. The porch let out a long creak as we stepped on it. I had this awful feeling that told me to run, like every part of me was screaming to get away, but I didn't. None of us did. I kicked the door gently and it folded inward like it was made of cardboard. I said something like, "Hello," and my voice didn't sound shaky, even though I felt it in my chest. No one answered. The smell of burned wood was heavy inside. Everything was charred, the bookcase, the fireplace, even an old rocking chair that had one side missing. Then came the sound, a dull thud. We all turned and looked around, but saw nothing. Another thud. This time we glanced at each other. Not a single one of us smiled. Then came a third, and we saw it. A square cut into the wooden floor, a trapdoor. It had old rusty hinges on one end and a big lock on the other. And it was moving. It lifted just a little. Dust floated up. Then another hit, harder this time. None of us could move. We just stared. The whole thing started to bow upward, like something was pressing from underneath. And then, for the shortest second, I saw it. One eye, wild, wide, looking right at us through the gap. I don't even remember turning to run. I was just suddenly sprinting like my life depended on it. I heard the others, their feet crashing behind and in front of me, and I felt something else. Something was after us. I'd never been faster than my friends before that day, not even close. But the idea of teeth behind me and that eye pushed me forward. I flew past every single one of them. We didn't stop until we reached the old pine stump. Every one of us bent over, catching our breath. Nobody said anything. Nobody admitted what we all knew, that we were terrified. We just stood there, quiet, all of us understanding the same thing without speaking. That walk back home felt longer than usual. Nobody joked. Nobody brought it up. We were back in the woods again the next day, but there was a silent rule between us now. We never went that far out again. and nobody ever did. Some things are better left unknown. Even as a grown-up now, I still can't explain what happened that day. Sometimes I lie in bed and think about that trapdoor, and I wonder how close it was to opening. That thought still makes my skin crawl. That afternoon, I had just come back from a workout, grabbed something to eat, and was about to unwind when my buddy rang me up and asked if I wanted to go for a ride on my bike. This was something we did all the time, just cruising around, playing loud music, enjoying the ride, and soaking up the good mood. The weather couldn't have been better, warm, sunny, and clear. So I picked up my helmet and keys and headed out. At first, we were just riding around, listening to tunes, enjoying the sun. After a while, my fuel started getting low, so we figured we'd head back. That's when my friend suddenly pointed toward what looked like a regular gravel path going off into the woods. We didn't have any plans, so we thought, why not check it out? The trail was steep, way steeper than it looked from the road. It was so steep my friend had to get off and walk while I pushed the bike up on my own. Once we reached a flat area, I decided to go ahead a little to see where the path went. It curved through thick forest, mostly gravel winding between tall trees. Then, on my left, something caught my eye. An opening in the trees with fresh tire marks heading down another smaller trail. It looked out of place, but I didn't think much of it and kept riding. That's when I spotted him. About 10 feet ahead, partly hidden by the bend in the road, there was a man standing next to a parked car. He hadn't noticed me yet, but I could see him clearly. He seemed to be in his mid-30s, wearing a dark cap and a gray hoodie. Something about the guy made me uneasy. My first reaction was maybe we had accidentally entered someone's private property. But there were no signs, no fences, nothing that said we weren't allowed. Still, my gut told me to turn back. I rode back to my friend, who was catching his breath after walking up that steep path with his helmet in hand. I told him about the man. Just as we were discussing whether to explore the smaller trail with the tire marks, something happened that made both of us freeze. Headlights. The car was suddenly coming fast in our direction. My friend leaped onto the back of my bike, and we raced downhill. When we reached the main road, I looked in the mirror. The car was still behind us. It had turned onto the road and was following us closely. My heart started pounding. He wasn't just following, he was gaining on us, keeping our speed. I took a sharp turn onto a smaller road I knew, one that led to an old bike trail. When we glanced back, the car had stopped, just sitting there, not moving. After a long moment, it slowly turned around and disappeared. The silence afterward was heavy. We laughed nervously, trying to brush off the weird feeling, telling ourselves maybe we were just imagining things. But we couldn't shake it. Later, we decided to check that area on Google Earth. At first, everything looked normal. Then we started looking closer. There were houses along the path in the old satellite pictures, and one of them stood out. It looked well-kept, freshly mowed lawn, and a trailer parked in the yard. But something felt wrong. There was junk scattered all over, clothes on the driveway, broken stuff in the yard. It looked like someone had left in a rush. The house seemed both lived in and abandoned. But the strangest part? When I tried to follow the road further on Google Earth, the path just disappeared. It was blurred out. The ending was wiped like someone had removed it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, we went back. Not planning to, but the curiosity got too strong. This time we brought another friend and took a car instead of the motorcycle. And I really wish we hadn't. The place didn't feel the same. The road seemed different. Paths we remembered clearly now felt wrong. But the biggest surprise? Cabin was there now. It hadn't been there before. I was completely sure of that. We had stood in that exact spot the first time, and it had been nothing but woods. But now there was an old wooden cabin. It looked weathered, like it had been standing there for years, but oddly well kept. Then we found a barricade, a new one. Someone had recently put up a barrier blocking the last part of the trail. We left the car behind and walked the rest of the way. The closer we got, the worse the atmosphere felt. I kept looking behind me. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. And then we saw it. A plain-looking building, surrounded by a tall metal fence. Right beside it, rising above the tree line, was a hidden radar tower painted in green camo. That's when we saw the sign, an official warning from the Defense Department. It said photography was not allowed. We didn't wait. We turned around immediately and hurried back toward the roadblock. Before leaving, we decided to get a closer look at the mystery cabin. My friend approached one of the windows. I stayed back, feeling a knot in my stomach. He looked inside for barely a second and then froze. He turned and ran without a word. I didn't even ask. I just ran too. We jumped in the car and I floored it down the road. After a minute, I asked him what he saw. He said it looked like a staged setup. Everything inside was spotless, too clean, like something from a movie set. It didn't feel real. But the most disturbing part? There was a fresh mug of coffee on the table, still steaming. Someone had just been there, and they had watched us. Since then, I've kept looking at the area on Google Earth. Something's seriously wrong. One of the houses, the one with the trailer and neat lawn, it's gone now. The other houses are still there, but that one has completely vanished from the map, like it never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know that house wasn't empty. Whatever is going on out there, it's not right. My partner and I had just moved into a tiny cabin sitting at the bottom of a mountain, surrounded on all sides by thick forest. It was our very first night there. We didn't have any furniture yet, only an air mattress laid out on the floor. The nearest homes were far down the road, much too far for anyone to hear or see anything from where we were. Felt truly isolated. I was getting the mattress ready while my partner was showering, when all at once, the air around me shifted. A strange pressure filled the room, like the static you feel right before a thunderstorm hits, tingling across my skin, lifting the hair on my arms. Before I could react, the air mattress suddenly caved in, the edges sticking to the floor while the middle puffed upward in a warped shape. I froze. My mind couldn't quite make sense of it. Then I sensed something. I turned my head to the right. Floating in the doorway, right at my eye level, was a glowing orb about the size of a soccer ball. It gave off a soft blue light. It wasn't just a solid color. It twisted and spun, almost like looking through a microscope at cells splitting apart. The whole room seemed heavier, like the air was thick and pressing in on me. Everything was totally quiet. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. Then the light shot forward. I jumped to the side, landing hard on the mattress just as the orb zipped past my head. Without stopping, it blew straight through the closed window and disappeared into the trees. I lay there, heart racing, staring at the glass pane. It was untouched, no hole, no crack, as if nothing had passed through at all. I was so shaken, I didn't say anything about it to my partner that night. I just sat there, going over it again and again in my mind. Even now, my hands shake when I think about it. Almost every night, from the trees east of our cabin, we'd hear these awful, chilling screams. They didn't sound like animals. They were more human but warped off somehow. I finally worked up the nerve to ask a man who lived farther down the road if he'd heard them before. He just shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, probably that older lady who camps out back there. She's not all there." His calm answer disturbed me even more. Why was a woman out in the woods shrieking like that every night? And if it really was her, why hadn't anyone done anything? Even with all the strange things going on, I tried to adapt to life in the cabin. One thing I really enjoyed was gold panning. We had a small stream about 50 steps from the front porch. One afternoon, I was down by the water, a bit off to the side of a little wooden bridge, sifting sand. That's when I noticed a worn-out pickup pull up nearby. The driver was a man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with a weathered face and a serious look. He rolled down his window and asked, "You carrying a gun?" I blinked, caught off guard. No, but I've got bear spray." His face didn't change. "It ain't the bears or mountain lions you should be worrying about out here." Then he drove off. I just stood there, watching the red of his taillights fade, this slow, cold knot forming in my gut. Years later, a friend got me into a podcast about odd experiences. Stuff like unknown creatures, strange lights, weird sightings. mostly stories about unexplained events in forests. I nearly dropped my drink when I heard people describing the exact same kind of orb I'd seen that night in our cabin. Not similar, the same. Dozens of people talking about a bright blue sphere moving just the way mine had. I used to laugh at the idea of Bigfoot or any of that stuff, just stories people told. But now, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. We sold the cabin a few years back, but I still think about it. About that orb, about the sounds from the woods, about the old man in the truck, and I still wonder what we actually shared those trees with. Me and my stepmom Tara grew up hearing stories about how she had a pretty cushy teenage life back in the 1970s. Her mother had moved their whole family to the US from Scotland when she was around 10. She went to a nice public school in a really peaceful town. That's where she became close with Sarah, who didn't really hang around with Tara's usual group. Tara was more into the stylish, popular crowd, but somehow, she and Sarah clicked. Sarah introduced her to the kind of outdoor stuff Tara never really tried before, like hiking, camping, fishing, and going out on the water. Tara had a sort of naturally moody look, with dark eyes and a face that always looked slightly annoyed. But because of Sarah's influence, she ended up spending a lot of weekends doing outdoorsy things. One weekend afternoon, they made a plan to go on a hike in some hills about an hour away from home. Tara, being who she was, probably wore ridiculously overpriced hiking boots, and the two of them drove out to the trail area. Sarah parked in a wide open space that had wooden posts stuck in the dirt to mark spots. There were no other vehicles there at the time, which would only seem important later on. They began hiking up the slope, but not using the main trail. Sarah liked to think of herself as the adventurous type. The walk up wasn't anything remarkable, at least if you ask my stepmom. She'd go on and on about how humid and full of bugs it was. Eventually, they reached the highest point and Tara was ready to call it quits. That more polished, less rugged side of her came out. She whined until Sarah finally gave in and agreed they could rest a bit before going back down. Taking it slower. They'd been on their way down for maybe 10 minutes when Tara started moaning again. This time, Sarah agreed to just walk along the road instead of the rough hiking path. So there they were, two girls dressed for a mountain adventure, trudging down a half-paved road. That's when a beat-up red pickup truck came crawling up beside them. It was old and rusty, looked like it had seen better years. The man inside rolled down the window on the passenger side so they could see him. He had a full beard, messy shoulder-length brown hair, and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He gave them a friendly grin, asked if they needed a lift. Tara, ever the romantic, described him as good-looking and oddly charming. But Sarah told us she felt uneasy the second he opened his mouth. Even so, Tara somehow convinced her to get in. "It's just a quick drive down," she probably said. The passenger seat had to be folded forward so they could get in the back, and they climbed inside. The truck jerked forward and started rumbling down the road. Sarah would later say that's when her gut told her they'd made a big mistake. The back seat looked clean enough, but there was a thick rope sitting on the floor behind the driver, and under the passenger seat were 4 half-exposed boxes of cling wrap. It was creepy. Sarah didn't want to upset Tara, so she didn't say anything right away. But after 10 minutes, they were still surrounded by trees. Not a single other car had passed them. Sarah asked how long the ride would be, and the man casually said he was taking another way down the hill and had to swing by somewhere first. That was it. They were both just 16. Sarah didn't want to keep questioning him. She was nervous. She said she remembered watching his long hair from the back. It was tangled and greasy, and there was dry mud caked into his collar. She tried to focus on anything that might help her remember what he looked like later, but the more she noticed, the more she panicked. He looked young, muscular, and just a little taller than either of them. He didn't give much away, and neither of them said anything else. A few minutes after, the truck pulled up to a tiny wooden structure. It looked like an old cabin, sitting in the middle of a clearing. There was a tree stump nearby with a giant axe driven into a chunk of wood. Sarah's nerves were firing on all cylinders. The man killed the engine and casually got out, saying, "Be right back. Don't go anywhere." Then he walked into the cabin. Sarah tried to explain to Tara how badly she wanted to get out of there, but Tara just brushed her off. Sarah kept pushing, getting more frantic. Eventually, she put her foot down and told Tara they were getting out now. So they climbed out, walked around to the front of the truck. The cabin was about 50 yards ahead of them. Why he would leave two teenage girls in his truck while heading into a strange shack was hard to understand. They lingered near the vehicle, glancing at the structure. Tara, raised with a strong sense of politeness and appearances, thought it would be rude to just run off. So she started heading back to the truck, opened the front door, and leaned inside. Sarah followed to argue with her again. That's when they saw it. On the driver's side floor, half tucked under the seat, was a hatchet. It had dry dark stains on it, red and brown, and underneath it, the floor looked sticky. Sarah totally lost it. Tara started freaking out too. They both instantly agreed it was time to get out of there. They darted away from the cabin and into the woods, pushing through the brush as fast as they could. They didn't have a clear sense of direction, but after some stumbling and aimless walking, Sarah felt like she was guiding them downhill again. Tara cried the whole way. Sarah felt guilty, but also panicked that her sobbing would give away their position. She tried to keep her calm as they made their way down. Finally, they saw the wooden fence that marked the edge of the makeshift parking lot where they had left Sarah's car. They felt a flood of relief until they noticed the red truck. It was parked across from the lot, facing the other way, just sitting there. They couldn't see if anyone was in it. Tara immediately wanted to run for the car, but Sarah stopped her. She said they needed to wait to make sure no one was watching. This was the late 70s, no cell phones, no ranger stations, and no one else around. The lot was wide open. If they were seen running across, there was no place to hide. Sarah begged her to stay down, and they crouched behind a tree, hidden in a patch of shrubs and branches. They waited for what felt like forever. As it got darker, the forest started coming alive with animal noises, and Tara started getting more restless, whispering constantly and shaking Sarah's nerves. Sarah was finally planning their dash when they heard a dull noise. They peeked through the branches and saw the back door of their car slowly creak open. And then the man stepped out. He slid from the back seat of their own car, closed the door, looked around into the woods for a long moment, then turned and strolled back to his truck. The truck drove slowly past their vehicle and disappeared into the trees. Once he was gone for a few minutes, they bolted, running like hell to the car, jumping in without shutting the doors completely, flooring it out of the lot. If that man is still alive, he's got to be old now. But neither of them ever wanted to see his face again. It was late November when all this happened. We arrived at the cabin on the afternoon of December 29th. The driveway was buried in snow, so I had to dig a path just to get the car close enough to unload our stuff. Laura was already inside, setting up the decorations we'd packed up a few weeks earlier. Anna and Sophie had rushed upstairs to unpack, already bickering over which room they wanted. Same as always. Gloria was curled up on the couch near the large front window, sipping tea and watching the woods sway. You couldn't see the lake from that window, but you could catch the sound of it when the wind blew the right way. The place was old, built in the mid-70s, but my father had done his best to keep it in good condition. The inside walls were all pine and creaked every time you took a step. It was quiet and remote, with almost 3 acres of trees between us and the next nearest house. We hadn't seen those neighbors in years. That first night, we kept it simple. Heated up some soup, started a fire, and played cards in the living room. Anna mentioned her boyfriend might stop by later that week, but we all figured she wouldn't bring him. The next morning, New Year's Eve was freezing but clear. I got up early to split firewood while everyone else slept. The snow had crusted over, so it held firm underfoot. I noticed a set of paw prints behind the storage shed. Probably a stray dog or maybe a coyote. I didn't dwell on it. I chopped wood for a while, then came back inside once my fingers started to sting. Gloria had nodded off near the fire. Sophie was watching something on her phone, and Laura was working on a list of groceries we'd need for the big dinner. That evening, we roasted chicken, potatoes, and string beans. Laura popped open a bottle of wine and convinced Gloria to have a glass even though she didn't drink anymore. We stayed up to watch the countdown on TV. Anna pulled out some silly party hats from a drawer. When the clock hit midnight, we toasted, hugged, and it all felt easy, quiet, familiar. I don't remember hearing any fireworks, just the wind through the pine trees. Sometime after 2 a.m., I stepped out onto the porch for a cigarette. We don't allow smoking inside. The forest was still. No stars, just thick clouds overhead. I thought I heard something in the distance. Branches breaking, maybe snow sliding off limbs. I wasn't sure. I stayed out a bit longer, finished the cigarette, then locked up and went back in. The next morning, I remembered the trail camera we had strapped to a tree near the back deck. We'd set it up the summer before. Battery was dead, though. I made a mental note to switch it out later, but I never did. On New Year's Day, we drove into Truckee to restock. More traffic than usual, mostly out-of-towners. Anna wanted champagne, and Laura suggested we grab something special for the evening meal. The market was packed. Took us over an hour just to check out. Sophie kept messaging from the car asking when we'd be back. Gloria had stayed behind with her. She never liked dealing with crowds. We picked up ribeye steaks, a few bags of ice, 2 bottles of cheap champagne, and a pack of sparklers Anna insisted on, even though we rarely used them. Driving back, the road was plowed but narrow. Snow was piled high along both sides. Pine trees flanked the road like walls. It was late afternoon, right before sunset, and the entire forest was glowing gold through the windshield. Anna was talking about her engagement, showing Laura photos on her phone. I was driving. I noticed a wooden trail marker lying broken in the ditch. Didn't give it a second thought. When we pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something strange. The rear door was slightly open, just a sliver. I turned off the ignition and asked, "Did anyone leave that open?" Laura shook her head. Gloria was never careless about stuff like that, and Sophie was cautious too, especially after raccoons got in through a kitchen window the year before. I told them all to stay in the car and walked up to check it out. I couldn't see any new prints in the snow, just our old ones. But the wind had picked up again and fresh flakes had begun to fall, maybe covering other marks. I nudged the door open with my boot. The kitchen light was on. One of the chairs was tipped over. "Hello," I called out loudly. No answer. I stepped inside, holding the grocery bag like a shield. The hallway looked untouched, but the living room had been messed up. Cushions tossed, a drawer under the TV pulled out. I backed up and waved for Laura to come forward. Told her to stand by the doorway and dial the sheriff. Sophie burst outside moments later, barefoot and shouting. "They were here," she said. "In the basement." I didn't get what she meant. I ran down the stairs. The basement had its usual musty smell, but something felt off. Blankets scattered on the floor, food wrappers, one of Gloria's old jackets missing from a plastic bin. 2 mugs sat on the workbench like people had been sitting down there recently. My stomach twisted. There were boot prints in the concrete, the edges slightly melted. When I came back up, the girls were gathered in the kitchen. Gloria looked dazed, confused. She kept saying she thought she heard Anna and Sophie downstairs moving around. Said she heard voices but didn't go down to check. That didn't make sense. Sophie had been upstairs with her the whole time. I double-checked all the doors and windows. No broken glass, no forced entry. All locks were intact. Either someone had gotten in when a door was left unlocked, or they'd been inside from the beginning, listening, waiting. The sheriff took nearly an hour to arrive. In that time, we noticed more things. My hunting knife gone from the garage, food missing from the pantry, a flannel shirt missing from the laundry. One small window in the laundry room was cracked open, barely noticeable, hidden behind stacked boxes. The deputies searched the place, room by room, but whoever had been there was long gone. They told us about the escapees. David Hart and Ryan Cook, 2 men who had broken out of Placer County Jail 3 days earlier. Armed robbery, assault. No one had warned us. The cabin had just seemed empty from the road. No lights, no vehicles. They must have seen us leave that morning. When we returned around 4 p.m., everything looked fine from the outside. Snow had started falling again, thin, steady flakes. We climbed out of the SUV, arms full of bags. Sophie cracked a joke about the tourists in town. We were still laughing as we reached the door. Laura was digging in her oversized bag for the keys. I was behind her, carrying food, when the door suddenly swung open from the inside. 2 men were standing there, prison uniforms. One older, maybe in his late 40s, tall, scruffy gray beard. The other was younger, nervous, mid-20s, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. The older one was holding my shotgun, the one I had locked in the garage. "In, now," the older man said. No shouting, no threats, just an order. We didn't move at first. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then he lifted the shotgun slightly and said it again. Laura gasped. Anna grabbed Sophie's hand. I felt my chest hollow out. We walked in. The younger one, Ryan, shut the door behind us. The living room had been completely ransacked. Cushions, drawers, flashlights scattered across the floor. They had searched everywhere. "Where are the other car keys?" the older man, David, asked. I told him we only had one car. He didn't believe me but didn't press it. He told us to sit down. Laura sat, then Gloria, then the girls. I stayed standing until he pointed the shotgun directly at me. I sat. David kept asking if we had a safe, any hidden money. I told him the truth, just cards and maybe $30 in my coat. He didn't like that. Ryan was pacing by the window, twitchy, pulling the curtain back over and over. "We need to leave," he kept saying. "We need to go now. Soon," David said, "just making sure we don't miss anything." We sat there, frozen. Felt like an hour, probably 10 minutes. I kept staring at the door, wondering if I could get to it in time. But the shotgun stayed in view. The girls were trembling. Laura squeezed my hand. What happened next never leaves me. David stepped toward Laura and raised the shotgun. No words, no hesitation. He pulled the trigger. The sound was unbearable. She was dead before she hit the floor. Gloria screamed and jumped up. He shot her too. Ryan shouted, "What are you doing?" but didn't move. He kept his pistol pointed at us, but his hands were shaking. I lunged at David. I didn't even think, just moved. He turned the shotgun on me and fired. Pain hit after the sound. I dropped. Everything faded. They must have thought I was dead. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I heard everything. Anna crying, Sophie begging, Ryan arguing, David saying, "Burn it down. No witnesses." I smelled smoke before I saw flames. Heard the fire crackling, wood catching fast. They were pouring liquor on the floor to fuel it. They dragged Anna and Sophie outside. So back when I was 34, I realized I needed to get away from the grind of teaching middle school kids in Eugene. I reserved a small cabin in the woods using one of those vacation rental apps for a long weekend in late October. The listing showed a cozy little place with a stone hearth, a couple of faded red chairs on the front porch, and tall evergreens wrapped all around it. It looked peaceful and tidy. I packed a few novels, 2 bottles of wine, and my portable speaker. I left Eugene around lunchtime on a Friday and drove 3 hours into the Cascades. The roads were pretty clear, and the sky was gray but not rainy. The leaves were just starting to change color. The gravel road that led to the cabin had a few tight turns, but nothing too bad. I printed the directions ahead of time in case I lost service. When I arrived, the cabin looked just like in the pictures. Dark green panels, a little chimney puffing out thin smoke, probably leftover from the last guest. A lockbox hung from the doorknob, just like the owner said it would. I entered the code, pulled out the key, and stepped inside. It was a single open room with a tiny kitchen, a couch, a bed tucked into one side, and a fireplace built from rough stones. It smelled like pine and old wood smoke. I put away my stuff, left the groceries and wine on the counter, placed my books on the nightstand, and plugged my phone into the wall near the window. The cabin was simple but neat. No TV, but I didn't mind. I made some pasta with Jared sauce, opened a bottle of wine, and sat in the chair closest to the fire as the light outside dimmed. I switched on a small battery lantern and read a little, then stepped out onto the porch for a cigarette. The air was cold and still. The only sounds were the wind passing through the trees. No road noise, no signs of nearby homes. Just forest and quiet. Back inside, I threw a couple more logs on the fire, rinsed off my dish, and poured another glass. At about 8 p.m., I was settling into my book again when I heard a knock on the door. Just 3 short raps, not loud. I stood up, said nothing, and checked the peephole. A man was standing there. He looked to be around his mid-50s or older, with short gray hair, a reddish beard, wearing a blue checkered flannel and jeans. No coat, but his boots were muddy. He gave a quick smile and a small wave. He said, "Hey there, I'm Dan Morris. I own the place. Just wanted to check everything's working fine." His voice was muffled, but I could hear him clearly enough. He had a slight accent I couldn't quite place. I opened the door just a crack and kept the chain in place. He repeated himself, said he lived farther down the mountain road and occasionally stopped by when guests checked in. Mentioned he had extra firewood in his truck if I needed any. I told him I was all set for the night, had a few logs left, and the cabin was already warm. He nodded and said, "No worries. I'll leave a few pieces on the porch in case you need them later." I thanked him, closed the door, locked it, and peeked out the window. Sure enough, there was an old white pickup parked off the drive, mostly hidden behind some brush. He pulled a few logs from the back and tossed them on the porch. Then he got in his truck and drove off, not turning on the headlights until he'd rounded the bend. That should have struck me as odd, but I figured maybe it was a mountain habit. Maybe he didn't want to light up the woods. I went back to my spot and kept reading. Every now and then I glanced toward the window, not really knowing why. No other cars passed that night. No more knocks. Just the sound of fire crackling and wind brushing over the roof. About an hour later, I had just thrown another log into the fireplace and was brushing my teeth in the small bathroom when I heard knocking again. Louder this time. Quicker. Same number of knocks, just more aggressive. I stopped in place, dried my hands, and stepped toward the front door. I didn't open it right away. I turned off the light near the door, leaned forward, and looked out the peephole. It was the same guy, Dan. His expression had changed. He didn't wave this time. I opened the door slightly, leaving the chain secured. "Yeah," I said. He didn't smile. "Sorry to bother you again," he said. "I got word there might be frozen pipes up the road. I need to check your plumbing. Just takes a minute." His voice had a different tone now, more serious, less friendly. Something about it made me feel off. My chest felt tight. "Everything's working just fine here," I said. "Water's running, no problems." He leaned in slightly, hand resting on the frame. "I should take a quick look. Standard check." I pushed the door closed harder and slid the deadbolt into place. I didn't say anything else, just listened. Through the curtain, I watched him stay on the porch a few seconds longer. He stood still, staring at the door. Then he slowly turned and walked down the steps into the dark. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone, opened the rental app, scrolled to the host's page, and tapped the number under Contact Host. A woman answered after 2 rings. Her voice was calm and clear. "Hi, this is Marissa. Is something wrong?" I explained quickly. A man at the door had said his name was Dan Morris. He came once, then came back again claiming he needed to check plumbing. She paused for just a second, then said clearly, "I don't know anyone named Dan Morris. I don't work with anyone local. I live in Nevada and I never send anyone to the cabin unless I let the guest know first. That's not one of my people." I remember how certain she sounded. No doubt at all. My skin chilled. I told her I thought he might still be around. As I spoke, I heard soft crunching outside, footsteps on gravel. I ducked into the kitchen and shut off the light, crouched down beside the counter and peeked through the blinds. I saw the same man. No flannel now, just a t-shirt despite the cold. He was walking slowly past the window, head turning side to side, peeking in. "He's back," I whispered. "Call the police," Marissa said. I'm calling the local sheriff right now. I hung up and called 911. I gave them the address and said someone was trying to get into the cabin. The dispatcher asked if I was safe and told me deputies were heading my way. Should be there in about 20 minutes. While I was still on the phone, I grabbed the biggest knife I could find in the kitchen and moved to the center of the room. From there, I could see the front door, the side window, and the bed area. I stayed low, phone in one hand, knife in the other, silent. I heard quiet footsteps outside again. Then the soft click of the back door handle. He was testing it, gently at first, then harder. Then silence. I didn't move. For a while I thought maybe he'd left. But then came a scratching at the back window. Light at first, like with a stick. Then more, sharper, maybe metal. I inched toward the back corner and peeked around the wall. The screen on the back window looked bent. Not how it was when I arrived. The scratching stopped. Several minutes passed. No more movement. No more sound. Then, faint and distant, I heard a siren, slowly getting louder. Red and blue lights flashed against the trees outside. I stood up and waited near the front door until a sheriff's SUV pulled into the drive. A deputy stepped out, flashlight in hand, one hand near his weapon. I opened the door and waved. He came in, swept through the cabin, checked the porch, and walked the outside perimeter with his light. After 10 minutes, he came back in. "There are footprints all over," he said. "Someone definitely messed with the back window. Scratches too. He's gone now, but we'll have a patrol car drive this road overnight." I asked if anything like this had happened before. He nodded slowly. "Every now and then, someone acts like they're the owner or a worker, targets vacation spots that seem empty. They usually leave if they think someone's called for help." I didn't ask anything more, just thanked him. He gave me a card and told me to call right away if anything else happened. He left after about 15 more minutes. The sound of tires crunching faded into the night. Then everything went quiet again. I barely slept. I kept one light on. Knife stayed on the nightstand. Shoes by the door. Nothing else happened. No more knocks. No more sounds. I stayed until Sunday morning. The rest of the stay was silent, but I never really felt at ease again. I packed up early, locked the door, dropped the key back in the box, and headed home before noon. About 4 weeks later, Marissa messaged me through the app. A man named Calvin James had been arrested not far from the area for trying to break into other short-term rentals. The police had found printed maps in his home, showing vacation properties, guest names, and marked dates. He'd been watching rental apps, picking out isolated cabins, especially ones booked by solo travelers. She said the footprints outside my cabin matched his shoes. Since then, I double-check everything before I travel. I always contact the host first. I share my trip details with a friend. I keep my phone charged, and if anyone ever knocks without warning, I don't answer. We reached the cabin just after midday. Turned out to be better than we expected. Wide glass windows faced the lake. The floors were spotless wood, and everything had that deep forest quiet that only exists far from cities. No signal on our phones, but that was exactly what we needed. Jenny and I were looking for peace, and more than that, we wanted the kids to take a break from screens. Adam and Lily didn't even complain, which caught me off guard. I think they were ready for something new too. That afternoon, we followed a trail around the lake. According to the map, it was around 5 miles, but we strayed from the path a little here and there. The leaves were starting to turn, orange, gold, deep red, like something from a painting. Adam skipped rocks across the water. Lily kept taking photos of odd mushrooms and moss growing on logs. A fox darted across the trail up ahead at one point. I remember Jenny smiling for most of the walk. We got back just before dusk and fired up the grill on the deck. I cooked hot dogs and Jenny whipped up her favorite cold pasta salad. The kids sat wrapped in blankets on the steps, their eyes on the lake. Later, we gathered in the living room, stretched across a large couch that faced the big windows. The last light made the surface of the lake shimmer. There was no noise, no boats, no voices, just stillness. I had a beer in my hand. Jenny was flipping through a paperback. Adam was fiddling with a Rubik's Cube. Lily had her sketch pad open, making slow strokes with a pencil. It all felt strangely perfect, a kind of peace we hadn't felt in a very long time. We went to bed early that first night. The next morning was colder. A fog hovered just above the lake's surface. I cooked toast and eggs while Jenny brewed coffee. We ate outside, jackets zipped, mugs steaming in our hands. The kids were slow to get moving, but once they were up, we packed some snacks and drove about 20 minutes to a trail a neighbor had suggested. There was an old wooden fire tower at the top of the climb. Adam went all the way up and said he could see Vermont in the distance. The wind was stronger up there. It felt like we'd stepped back in time. No phones, no updates, no interruptions. Just trees, breeze, and leaves crunching beneath our boots. We got back to the cabin by evening. Jenny started a stew. I took a pair of binoculars from the shelf and sat outside again. Lily came out and sat beside me. She was quiet, then suddenly pointed toward the far edge of the lake, near the treeline. "Is that a wolf?" she asked. At first I didn't spot it. Then something stepped out from between two tall birches. It looked like a big shepherd mix. From that distance, it seemed healthy, but something wasn't right. It wasn't walking like a normal dog. The steps were odd, one leg dragging, its body swaying like it couldn't balance. The way it moved was unnatural. I handed the binoculars to Lily, but she only glanced before returning them. "That's not right," she muttered. Jenny came out to see what we were watching. By now, the animal was closer to the water. It circled the same patch of ground over and over like it was looking for a scent, but its head kept twitching to the side in a strange way. "Maybe it's hurt," Jenny said. "Might have a collar." She started down the steps. I held her back. "Wait," I said. "Let me check first." I lifted the binoculars again. Its eyes were hard to make out, but its mouth hung open. Not like it was tired or panting, just hanging slack. Thick drool, or maybe foam, was dripping from its jaw. It shook its head suddenly, sharply, like it was trying to throw something off its neck. Then it stopped moving and turned its head directly toward the cabin. I lowered the binoculars. "Don't go near it," I said. "Something's really wrong." Jenny stood frozen on the steps. Lily had already gone inside. Adam was probably in the kitchen again, hunting snacks. I didn't take my eyes off the animal. It began walking again, slower this time. Its head was low, its jaw still open. It moved along the lake's edge, neither toward us nor away, just gliding along, unsteady, one leg dragging behind. The air felt heavier all of a sudden. It seemed darker, though the sun hadn't set yet. I stepped onto the grass, slowly made my way closer until I stood near the fire ring. I peered through the binoculars again. The animal was farther off now, maybe 60 feet away behind a patch of tall grass. Its ears flicked, then it just sat down, dropped almost like its legs gave out. It didn't face us anymore, just stared out over the water. Jenny came and stood beside me. "Might be rabid," I said. She gave a short nod but didn't reply. The stew scent was drifting from the open windows now. We went back inside and, without even talking about it, locked the doors. It felt silly, but I didn't want to take any chances. I checked again through the glass. The dog, or whatever it was, hadn't moved, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way it looked at us before, like it saw something deeper. I told everyone to stay away from the windows. Jenny hesitated, but after seeing my expression, she nodded. Adam checked the sliding door twice. Lily shut the bedroom windows. I stood near the kitchen, keeping watch. The animal had started moving again, wobbling slowly up the slight hill behind the fire pit. It wasn't coming quickly, but it didn't stop either. Now that it was closer, I could see its eyes better. Cloudy, unfocused. It didn't look at us anymore. It moved like it was being pulled along by something internal. No control. It reached a puddle near the base of the deck, lowered its head toward it, maybe to drink, and the moment its tongue hit the surface, it jolted back as if it had touched something electric. It stumbled and dropped to the side, legs twitching wildly. Just for a moment. Then it lay still. Hydrophobia. That's when I knew. Classic sign of rabies. It's sick, I said to Jenny. We stay inside. She looked unsure. Are you certain? It's textbook, I said. We wait. The dog pushed itself back up. Blood had begun leaking from its mouth. Not a lot, but noticeable. His tongue was swollen now, hanging far out and dragging in the dirt. I stepped away from the window. I gathered everyone into the center of the living room. I didn't want anyone near the glass. The kids wrapped up in blankets. Jenny stood behind the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me. The animal turned again. Now it was making a slow beeline for the sliding doors. The steps were awkward. I could hear it breathing short, broken gasps. It sounded like it was choking. Each step dragged more. Its legs barely functioned, but it kept moving. Finally, it reached the doors. It stood just inches away. Its head was low. None of us moved. It was like we were holding our breath. Then it lunged, smashed into the glass with a crack so loud Lily screamed. It bounced off and began clawing, long nails screeching down the surface. Its jaws hit the glass hard, leaving behind streaks of blood and spit. It slammed into it again and again. Its snarls were mixed with strange, high-pitched whines, almost like crying. Jenny pulled the kids down the hallway. I stayed in the living room watching. The sound of its body against the glass was brutal. I thought the pain might break. It rammed into it again, its claws leaving lines. One of its teeth snapped off on the edge. More blood, more foam, more rage. It didn't stop. Not after 5 minutes. Not after 10. Every now and then it would shake its head hard, then crash forward again. Its eyes spun wildly now. Foam flew with each impact. The lower half of the door was covered in smears of red and white. Saliva dripped in thick strands. I saw teeth marks gouged into the rubber seal at the bottom. Adam called from the hallway. Is it going to get in? I don't think so, I said. I wasn't sure. Eventually, the animal backed off. It stumbled in a small circle, then limped toward the woods. One leg dragged behind, like it wasn't attached right. It vanished into the trees. I called the local ranger station right away. The man who answered didn't sound shocked. He asked for our address and said someone would be sent out. Don't try to handle it yourself, he said. We've had other reports this month. We waited. I kept scanning the woods through the glass but didn't see it again. An hour later, headlights came up the gravel road. A white truck with state plates. 2 officers got out. One holding a tranquilizer gun, the other with a long metal pole and thick gloves. I pointed toward the woods. They moved slowly between the trees. About 10 minutes later, one radioed in. They'd found the dog. It had collapsed about 60 yards in. Still alive, barely. One officer came back and asked to use the phone. The other stayed behind. It's rabid, he said. No question. We can't risk moving it. It'll be put down here. We didn't ask to watch. We didn't want to. They took photos, filed a report, then contacted. When I was 27, my new wife Lily and I were looking for a peaceful honeymoon that wouldn't break the bank. We weren't hard to please, just wanted somewhere calm and far from the stress of the wedding. Lily found a cabin rental up in the mountains of northern Idaho, about 30 miles from the nearest town. She'd been planning it for weeks, showing me photos from the website. Cozy wooden interior, a stone fireplace, and large windows that looked out over snow-covered hills. It looked like something out of a postcard, and since it was early winter and off-season, it was surprisingly affordable. We left the reception still in parts of our wedding clothes, stuffed everything else in duffel bags, and hit the road. It was late, but the roads were clear. After a few hours of winding through empty roads up the hills, we arrived. The cabin looked just like it did online. Simple furniture, a working fireplace with a tidy stack of firewood, and a small but neat kitchen. The heat was already running. On the counter sat a little welcome basket with a bottle of cheap wine and some instant cocoa packets. Lily lit up when she saw it and started snapping pictures to text her mom. The cell signal was weak, but she got a couple of bars standing on the front steps. I unloaded the bags while she explored. The whole place smelled like wood and dust, but in a good, clean way. We were tired but still too full of energy to sleep, so we stayed up drinking cocoa and watching snow drift past the windows. The next day was slow and perfect, which was the point. Lily made pancakes and we ate in our pajamas by the fire. We went for a short walk around midday but didn't get far because the snow was deeper than we expected. There weren't any cabins nearby, just trees and snow and that deep silence that makes the world feel empty. I remember the stillness most of all. Lily said it was perfect. That night, we played cards, listened to music from a Bluetooth speaker, and sat by the fire. Everything felt peaceful. The following morning, I stepped out onto the back porch to brush some snow off the railing. That's when I saw the boot prints. They started where the tree line began, maybe 20 feet out, and led straight to our glass doors. I stared for a moment, trying to make sense of it. The prints were large, bigger than mine, and deep with heavy tread like something a construction worker or logger might wear. I looked around. No one in sight. Snow was still falling lightly, so the tracks couldn't have been older than a few hours. I told Lily while she was brushing her hair. She didn't look too worried. The rental info had mentioned that sometimes maintenance staff checked in now and then. Maybe someone had come by to check the heating or pipes. I nodded, but something felt off. If it was staff, why didn't they knock? There were no tire tracks, no other footprints, just one set that came to the door and then nothing. No return trail. Still, I didn't press it. I didn't want to spoil the mood. I locked the door anyway and told myself I'd keep an eye out just in case. That afternoon, we stayed in. The wind was picking up and the snowfall had gotten heavier. Lily made soup and we watched a movie on my laptop. Around sunset, I stepped outside again. The boot prints were still there, now partially covered. No new ones. No sign of anyone. I pushed the thought aside. Maybe someone checked in. Just like Lily said. That night, we opened the wine from the basket and went to bed early. The wind made the windows creak, but I managed to sleep fine. Next morning, I woke up early, still dark, around 6 a.m. I went to the kitchen to start coffee and glanced outside. The prints were back. Fresh ones this time. The older ones had been buried mostly, but now there was a brand new set. Same size, same tread. They led once again from the tree line to the same glass doors. I quietly went over and looked through the window. Nothing there. I checked the lock. Still bolted. Walked to the front door. Still locked. All windows shut. I didn't wake Lily. I just stood there for a bit, trying to process. Maybe it really was a staff member doing a quiet inspection or something. But why come back? And why not let us know? No messages. No notes. Nothing. Later, Lily woke up and I told her. She looked at the prints and frowned. Said it was strange, but maybe someone was checking the water or electrical system and not allowed to disturb guests. I didn't buy it, but I didn't argue. We tried to go about the day as normal. Played some games, read for a bit, stayed wrapped up in blankets. But I kept checking the windows again and again. That night, I left a small lamp on and pulled the curtain back just enough to keep watch over the porch. I stayed awake until well past midnight, staring at the gap in the curtain. Nothing moved. No new tracks, just more snow falling. I must have passed out after 2 a.m. When I woke, the light I'd left on was off. I sat up, blinked a few times. Lily was still asleep beside me. I stepped into the living room. The air was cold. Thermostat showed 56 degrees Fahrenheit. I turned it up and flicked the lights again. Nothing. Power was out. Must have gone out during the night from the storm. I looked outside. More prints. New ones again. That night, around 2 a.m., Lily shook me awake. I could barely open my eyes, but she whispered, "Someone's on the porch." Her voice was tight, scared. We froze, stayed completely still, listening. Then I heard it too, slow footsteps on the front porch. The kind you hear when someone's trying to move without sound. We stayed quiet. The steps moved across the porch, then paused. Then they moved again toward our bedroom window. I heard a faint brushing sound, like fingers or gloves tracing the screen. Very light, just a soft tapping along the edges. Lily gripped my arm hard. Neither of us said anything. The curtain was shut, but that didn't stop whoever it was. More scraping, Then they moved to the next window. Slow, careful. They stopped at each one, then kept going. We heard the back door handle jiggle, then the front. Just soft clicks, enough to tell they were testing the locks. It went on like that for maybe 20 minutes. No talking, no knocking, just someone checking around the whole cabin like they were trying to find a way in. Then silence. We didn't know if they left or just stepped out of sight. We stayed still, listening to the cold, silent dark until the first bit of daylight crept in through the curtains. At sunrise, I got up and looked around. Every window, every door, boot prints. Same shape, same pattern. Whoever it was had made tight loops around the entire building. Checking things up close, I opened the back door and stepped out. The snow showed it all clearly. A slow, methodical walk circling the cabin. Twice, maybe 3 times. Lily joined me, wrapped in a blanket. She saw the tracks, didn't speak at first, just stared. Then she said, "We're leaving now." I didn't disagree. We packed up fast, under 10 minutes. No breakfast, no showers. Just threw our stuff into bags and loaded the car. I drove slow and careful on the icy road. Lily kept looking in the mirrors like she was expecting someone to step out from the woods behind us. Once we got cell signal, I called the cabin owner. He sounded surprised but didn't brush it off. I explained the tracks, the windows being checked, the footsteps. He said he was really sorry and explained that sometimes people, usually homeless or passing through, ended up near the property looking for shelter in bad weather. He mentioned something like that had happened a couple of years earlier. Someone had squatted in an empty rental during a storm. He gave us a full refund. Lily wasn't even listening at that point. She just stared out the window. I told him we were heading back home. He offered to move us to a cabin closer to town, but I said no. We weren't going to enjoy the rest of the trip after that. We got home that night. The house felt warm, safe, but too loud. Neither of us slept much. I kept hearing those steps on the porch in my head. Calm, slow, careful. Not drunk, not animals. A person, someone deliberately checking each door and window. A few days later, the property owner called again. He sounded more serious this time. He said local law enforcement had found signs of a camp a short walk from the cabin. A tarp, a small fire pit, a sleeping bag. They believed it belonged to a man who had lost his job and had been wandering around the area. Nothing violent in his background, but they said his behavior had been escalating. The owner said they were adding motion lights, cameras, and signs warning that the area was under surveillance, trying to make it clear that someone was watching, even if the cabin looked vacant. He thanked me for reporting everything and said they were refunding the full week. Lily and I didn't talk much about it afterward. It wasn't the kind of thing we wanted to relive. We had gone looking for a quiet honeymoon and ended up learning something different. Being isolated has its cost. There's a reason hotels have staff, neighbors, parking lots. Since then, we've still gone to the mountains, but only with people nearby, in places with lights, with someone around to call for help if needed. If something feels off, it probably is. That's what stuck with us. Sometimes the danger doesn't knock. Sometimes it We left the city shortly after 10 p.m., with Justin driving his father's old Jeep that had a cracked windshield and a dent near the front passenger side. Corey sat in the front seat, legs propped up on the dashboard. I was in the back, next to a cooler packed with energy drinks and a plastic bag holding chips, beef jerky, and a single bottle of cheap bourbon that Justin had somehow talked his cousin into buying for us. Even at night, it was warm. We rolled the windows down, and the scent of pine trees and dirt drifted in as we left the pavement and turned onto rough back roads. Took us longer than planned. The directions were spotty. Justin kept looking at a screenshot of a message from his cousin. But eventually, we found an old wooden sign nearly covered in moss that said, Camp Arrowbend. The trees thinned out a little and we drove into a gravel clearing in front of a 2-story wooden lodge. The front porch drooped but looked strong enough. It didn't seem like anyone had been there in a long time. No spray paint, no garbage, no beer bottles. We parked and grabbed our things. The air felt heavier in the forest, like it was closing in all around us. The crickets chirped steady and loud. We climbed up the porch. Justin tried the door handle and it creaked open. Inside, the air was dry and still. Dust swirled in the light from our phones. Upstairs, rows of bunk beds lined the rooms. Downstairs had a big old fireplace made of stone. Corey found a shelf in the kitchen with some rusty utensils and old metal trays. I took pictures while we explored. Some of the walls still had posters from the 80s, camp rules, arts and crafts, safety notes. Corey found a hallway in the back with framed photos of kids wearing matching yellow shirts, all smiling by a lake. One showed a boy holding a fishing rod standing next to a camp leader with a clipboard. It was nailed to the wall with a bent, rusty tack. We set up upstairs, picking bunks that didn't look too mildewed. We laid out our sleeping bags, lit a citronella candle Justin had packed, and passed around snacks while we took turns playing music off Corey's Bluetooth speaker. The place felt strangely untouched. No animals, no mess, no sign that anyone had been crashing there. Justin joked that we had found the last spot that hadn't been ruined by social media. It was just after 1 a.m. when we heard it, measured footsteps on the porch. Not rushing, just slow and steady. We went quiet. The music was still playing quietly, but Justin muted it. Corey turned off his flashlight. We listened. No voices, no knocking, just slow steps on old wooden boards. I motioned for them to stay quiet. I crept over to the window on the side and peered out. The porch was mostly hidden by the angle, but I could make out a shape move across the far end of the railing. Just one figure. I couldn't make out the face, just the top of someone's head slowly moving toward the door. We didn't say a word. Justin grabbed his heavy flashlight and held it like a bat. Corey had a pocket knife already in hand. I didn't have anything, so I crouched by the window and kept listening. The steps stopped at the door. We waited. No knocking, just stillness. After maybe a minute, Corey whispered, "Maybe they left." Justin shook his head. "They're still there." I didn't look again. I stared at the floor. Then we heard the slow creak. The door started to open. No slam, no force. Just the quiet sound of the door easing in, scraping slightly along the floor. We stayed frozen. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Another footstep. The wood groaned. The candle flickered, casting weird shadows on the wall. We could hear someone walking, slowly, inside, one foot scraping softly across the floorboards. Corey was breathing fast. Justin's grip tightened on the flashlight. The steps didn't head upstairs. They stopped near the fireplace. Justin waved at us to move. We crawled toward the hallway leading to the back staircase. It was tight but maybe led outside. I went first, avoiding the creaky boards. Corey followed, then Justin. The steps were steep and loud. Each one felt like a drumbeat. The kitchen at the bottom was pitch black. We stopped behind a pantry door, barely breathing. Upstairs, the candle went out. Footsteps again, this time heading to the stairs. We didn't wait. Justin pointed at the back door. Corey opened it gently, trying not to make noise. Stuck a little, then gave. One by one, we slipped out. Outside, the air was cooler. The trees shifted slightly in the wind. We could see our breath. We moved fast along the edge of the cabin toward the Jeep. Then we saw it, the front left tire. Flat, not blown, cut. A clean slice across the rubber. Justin cursed quietly. Corey was already checking his phone. No service. We didn't say anything. We climbed into the Jeep, hoping we could still move it on the rim and get closer to help. Justin turned the key. The engine turned over, but the Jeep tilted hard to one side with a grinding sound. We eased out of the lot, the rim scraping with each turn. We didn't look back. Then the headlights caught movement. Just for a second, a person standing in the middle of the road. Not moving, not hiding, just standing like they were waiting. Justin hit the brakes. We all leaned forward. The figure didn't budge. Then they turned and stepped off the road into the trees. Justin didn't wait. He started driving. Slow at first, then faster. The Jeep bounced along the dirt path. Branches scratched the sides. The rim made a loud grinding sound the whole way. It felt like forever, but we finally reached the highway. The Jeep barely held together. 20 minutes later, We coasted into a gas station. Justin called his cousin. Corey went to the bathroom. I stayed near the Jeep, staring at the cut tire and the dry dirt still on the bumper. The footsteps were coming back, slow and heavy, like someone trying to move quiet but still making the old floorboards creak. We turned off the flashlights and ducked low under the windows. Justin peeked through a crack in the wall. I looked too. Through the trees, we saw a flashlight beam moving around the outside of the cabin. Not fast, not shaking, just steady, calm, like whoever held it wasn't in a rush. Justin whispered, "Might be a ranger or just someone checking the place." Corey leaned over. "Is this government land?" "Don't know," Justin said. "Could be private." The beam moved along the back wall. We heard someone trying a window, then walking along the wall. Slow boots on gravel. A few seconds later, the back door handle jiggled. Then silence. Just the trees groaning and the buzz of insects. Corey looked nervous. "We should say something. If it's just a local guy doing rounds, he should know we're not thieves." Justin shook his head. "Wait, if it's nothing, he'll go. If it's not, talking won't help." We heard the steps move around again to the front porch. Another creak, heavier this time. The door opened. We stopped breathing. The floor moaned under someone's weight. One step, then another, slower. Whoever it was, they didn't say anything. Didn't shine their light upstairs. They just stood near the entrance. Then finally, words. A low voice, calm, not hurried. "Who's up there?" We said nothing. Again, the voice, firmer. "Come down now." We couldn't stay hidden forever. I stood up first, slowly. "Sorry," I called out. "We were just camping. Didn't realize someone still looked after this place." I stepped to the top of the stairs. Justin and Corey followed. A man appeared at the bottom, holding a long flashlight, wearing a jacket and work overalls. His boots were muddy. He looked about 60, face lined, serious. "You're on private land," he said. "Didn't think to ask who it belonged to before wandering in?" Corey tried to explain. "We thought it was abandoned. There was no fence or anything. We didn't break stuff." The man didn't move, still trespassing. "I ought to call the sheriff." He started up the stairs, one slow step at a time, flashlight shaking just a little. Justin whispered, "Let's just grab our things and leave." But the man kept coming, tone the same. "You kids think you can just crash wherever you like?" Corey stepped forward, hands raised. "We didn't mean any harm." The man interrupted. "I'm calling it in. You'll explain to the law." Then Corey lost it, not angry, just scared. He pushed the man hard in the chest. The guy staggered backward, caught his heel on the step, but somehow grabbed the railing before he went down. He shouted something, but we didn't stick around. We raced down the stairs, grabbed whatever we could, and sprinted for the Jeep. No looking back. We threw everything into the trunk, piled in, and Justin reversed over some bushes and hit the road. The trees closed in behind us. No one talked on the ride back. Justin kept glancing at the mirror. Corey stared out the window. I sat holding my phone, heart still pounding. We got back around 4 in the morning. It happened the year before last when I was working as a software developer in Pine Hollow, a quiet little mountain town in Wyoming. I had moved there from Salt Lake City for the peace and the cheaper rent on a 24-acre property a few miles from town. My closest neighbor lived around half a mile away, which worked well for my work-from-home setup. The internet was decent enough for video calls and uploading code, and I liked the stillness. Each Tuesday, I drove into town to grab groceries at the only market within 25 miles. It wasn't anything fancy, but it stocked everything I usually bought. My routine never changed: fresh produce, canned items, frozen meals, then checkout. The town was tiny, so I got familiar with the same faces each week. Most of the folks who worked at the store knew me by name. They even joked about how I always went through the same order while shopping. That Tuesday felt just like any other. The sky was clear, still chilly in the mornings but warming up as noon rolled around. I parked in my usual space at the far end of the lot, grabbed a cart, and went straight for the fruits and veggies. The produce section was right up front on the right side as you walked in. I always began with apples, then grabbed carrots and bags of spinach. As I was sorting through the Honeycrisp apples, I noticed a man off to the side by the potatoes. He was wearing a camo jacket, stained jeans, and heavy work boots. Looked like he was in his 40s, with patchy facial hair and greasy hair tucked behind his ears. Nothing unusual by itself. There were plenty of hunters in the area. But the way he looked at me made me pause. It wasn't just a glance. He stared straight at me, blank face, no reaction. I gave a quick nod out of habit, said a quiet "hey," but he didn't reply, didn't blink or nod, just kept staring. It felt strange, but I figured maybe he had something going on mentally. I moved on. Next were onions and garlic. Then I turned into the next aisle to get some canned beans and diced tomatoes. Couple minutes passed, and I saw him again. Same distance, around 20 feet behind me. No cart, no basket. Still hadn't picked up a single thing. He just came into the aisle after I did and stood there at the end. When I looked over, he didn't turn away. I tried to brush it off. Figured maybe he was looking for someone. I picked up what I needed and went over to the baking supplies. When I glanced behind me, he was there again, still keeping just enough distance to not be close, but never going anywhere else. By the time I reached the freezer section, I was starting to get nervous. I moved the cart faster than usual, skipped a few things I usually got. I passed one of the workers I knew, a kid named Eric, and gave him a small nod. I thought about telling him what was going on, but stopped myself. What could I say? That some guy was walking through the store without buying anything. It's not like that's illegal. I just wanted to finish and leave. I hurried through the last aisle and headed for checkout. I looked behind me one more time. He was still there, hands tucked in his jacket, eyes locked on me like I'd done something wrong. At the register, I quickly put everything on the belt. The cashier, Anna, smiled and asked, "Busy week?" I mumbled something about being behind on projects and glanced toward the doors. The man wasn't in line. He wasn't paying. He was off to the side near the entrance, just standing there like he was waiting. I ran my card, didn't even bag everything properly, just threw it in the cart and rushed out. Outside, the lot was nearly empty. My truck was parked 4 rows over. I pushed the cart over the bumpy pavement, eyes flicking toward the store entrance. The guy had followed me out about 10 seconds behind. He wasn't carrying anything. No bag, no receipt. He just stepped out and leaned against the wall, watching me again. I opened the back of my truck and started tossing the bags in. The wind was picking up, and a few empty carts clanged together nearby. I didn't look straight at him, but I could feel he hadn't moved. He just kept watching me load up. I drove back home, feeling unsettled about the weird interaction, but assumed it probably wasn't anything serious. My place was out of the way enough that odd stuff didn't happen much, and folks usually kept to themselves. But that guy's face, how he stared, it stayed in my mind the whole way home. The drive took half an hour on the main road and another 10 minutes down a dirt road surrounded by pine trees and dry brush. It was getting dark fast. As I pulled into my driveway, the headlights lit up something that made my stomach drop. A dark-colored pickup was parked off to the side of my house, about 50 feet from the porch. No lights on, engine off. I slowed to a stop. It wasn't mine. I don't get visitors. My nearest neighbor, who lives half a mile down, drives a silver SUV. This truck was old, probably black or dark gray, and had mud splashed along the sides. I tried to recall if I'd seen the same truck in town. Pretty sure it was a few spaces away from mine in the grocery store lot, parked near the cart return. I stayed in my truck with the engine still running, staring at the other vehicle. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. No movement, no sound, just parked like it belonged there. I reached under my seat and pulled out the baseball bat I always kept just in case. I didn't want to step out, but I didn't want to drive away either. I sat and watched the truck for a few more minutes. Still nothing. Finally, I opened the door, grabbed the bags quickly, and walked to the front steps without turning my back completely. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked up tight. From my kitchen window, I could see part of the yard. The truck hadn't moved. No door opened. No one stepped out. I shut off the inside lights so I could see better through the glass and sat down in the dark to watch. An hour passed. No sound. No sign of life. Just that truck sitting there like a warning with no words. Then all of a sudden, the headlights flicked on, and the engine started up. It backed out slowly, then turned and disappeared down the road. I phoned the sheriff's office the next morning. Told them someone had parked outside my home for more than an hour and left when they noticed I was watching. They made a report but said unless the person came up to my door or tried breaking in, there wasn't much they could do. Probably someone who got lost, they said, or confused. I didn't argue. That night, I went to sleep early, around 10. I left the porch light on and put a wooden bar in the sliding glass door. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint noise, a clicking sound, light but steady. I held my breath and listened. There it was again, right at the front door, metal on metal. I got up quietly and tiptoed down the hallway, barefoot, my chest pounding. As I got closer, I could hear the sound clearly now. Tiny tools scraping at the lock, picking at the deadbolt. I backed away and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911 right away. The dispatcher picked up quickly, and I told her someone was trying to get into my house. She asked where I was, confirmed my address, and said, "Officers are headed your way, but it'll take at least 20 minutes." The scraping stopped. Everything went silent. Then I heard footsteps crunching the gravel. Then soft thuds as he moved along the side of the house. I went to the guest room and peeked through the window, staying low. A flashlight beam swept across the backyard. The man was walking slowly, checking around the place. I heard him try one of the side windows, first soft tapping, then a hard push. It didn't budge. He kept going, trying the next one. The dispatcher stayed on the line. I whispered that he was testing the windows. She told me to stay down and keep quiet. I watched him round the corner, then heard him try the back door. The wooden bar held. He moved again. 10 minutes went by like that. Him circling, trying things, quietly testing. Then I saw flashing lights, red and blue, coming up the road. He didn't notice them at first. He was still messing with a window. When the lights lit up the trees, he paused, looked up, and suddenly took off running into the woods behind the house. Deputies searched the area with flashlights. I came outside once they said it was safe. One officer had spotted boot tracks near the back windows and followed them into the forest. They found a truck parked behind a bunch of trees about 100 yards from the road. Another deputy saw the suspect sprinting toward it. They tackled him before he reached it. It was the same guy from the market. Same camo jacket. Same greasy hair and blank expression. Only this time he was covered in dirt and sweating. They put him in cuffs and checked the truck. Inside, they found a knife, a length of rope, and a bag with zip ties. On the passenger seat was a folder filled with pictures. Photos of my house taken during the day. One of my truck. One picture through the window with me inside. His name was Kevin Morris. A drifter, they told me. No permanent address. No job. Just a history of trespassing and stalking across several states. They said he would travel from town to town, pick someone out at random, usually someone alone, and follow them. Sometimes he'd steal. Sometimes worse. They didn't give details, but one of the officers said I was fortunate. He didn't know me, didn't have any reason to choose me except that I was alone and easy to predict. So when I was 24, my older brother Ben and I decided to hike some trails deep inside a national forest in Northern California. We were both living in Sacramento at the time and worked office jobs. He did IT maintenance at a local college, and I was handling customer support for a mid-sized software company. Ben had just picked up a brand new handheld GPS unit, one of the best models out, and was eager to try it somewhere far from cell coverage. We had been talking for weeks about unplugging from screens, so a long day hike in one of the quiet, thick parts of the woods seemed like a good idea. We left the city around 7 a.m. and drove for a little over 2 hours before pulling into a small gravel area off a fire access road. No other vehicles were around. The weather was ideal, cool but not cold. Sky was clear, and the trail wasn't muddy. We didn't pack much, just bottles of water, jerky, sandwiches, and the usual stuff. The first few hours were great. The trail was narrow and wound through dense pine trees. No signs of trash or other hikers. Felt wild in a good way. About 3 hours in, we noticed what looked like a roof edge through the trees, just barely visible above the slope. We stepped off the path and walked about 50 yards through thick brush until we came to an old wooden cabin, clearly abandoned. The siding was a dull gray, and the roof was starting to sag from years of snow. One shutter was swinging loosely, smacking against the frame every time the breeze kicked up. No tire prints, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been nearby for a while. Ben wanted to take a closer look. We weren't in a hurry, so we figured it wouldn't hurt to check it out. We climbed the 3 old steps, which groaned under us but didn't break. The front door was shut but not locked. Ben gave the knob a twist, and it opened without any trouble. Inside, it was dim. We stood there for a few seconds, letting our eyes adjust. It smelled musty, like wet wood and dust. There were a couple of wooden chairs, a small table, and a single cot tucked into the corner. Everything was layered in dust and cobwebs. The floor creaked loudly with each step. I walked over to the fireplace and noticed something strange. The ashes inside weren't completely cold. A few faint red embers still glowed faintly, and I could feel warmth if I held my hand close. Not fresh hot, but not cold either. I touched the stone ledge, then pulled my hand back quickly. Ben was standing near the table looking at a small pile of things. "Come check this," he said. I went over. There were 3 prescription bottles sitting on the table. The labels were still easy to read, and one had been filled just 5 days earlier. There was also an opened can of beans and a spoon with dried sauce on it. A half-drunk water bottle sat beside a pouch of instant oatmeal. None of it looked spoiled. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. Ben gave me a look. "Think someone's still here?" I said. I tried to sound casual, but my voice came out quieter than I intended. We didn't hear anything. No movement outside, no talking. Just the kind of silence that makes you listen harder. My phone had no bars, not surprising. Ben's GPS was still working, though. He kept glancing at it like it made him feel better. We stood there in silence, taking in the place. It didn't feel like an old, empty cabin anymore. More like someone had gone out for a short walk and hadn't come back yet. There was a heavy coat hanging from a nail near the door. Sturdy canvas, well worn but not covered in dust. On a shelf, there was a flashlight and a short stack of canned food. The bed was messy, like someone had just gotten up. "We should go," I said. "Yeah," Ben agreed, already stepping back toward the front. That's when we heard it. A low moan, quiet and strained, coming from beneath the floor. We both froze. Ben stared at me, eyes wide. He heard it too. A few seconds passed, then it came again, softer this time. I moved to the back part of the cabin where the floor looked different, like a section had been repaired. A small square panel with a metal ring was set into the wood, almost like a trapdoor. Ben crouched beside it and leaned down. Another moan, definitely human and pained. I reached down, grabbed the ring, and pulled. The wood made a cracking sound as it opened, dust swirling up. Underneath was a wooden ladder leading into darkness. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then the moaning came again, closer this time. Ben flicked on his flashlight and aimed it into the hole. The beam lit up rough concrete walls and dirt below, maybe 8 feet down. Something shifted. A shape, maybe a foot or a leg, moved near the corner. Ben called out, "Hello!" The sound turned into a cough, then quiet. I grabbed my own flashlight and leaned over the edge. A man was down there, maybe mid-40s. He was lying on his side. His face looked pale, and his shirt was soaked with either sweat or something darker. His eyes flickered open briefly, then shut again. I looked back at Ben. "We need help." No bars still. Ben glanced around the room. "We can't just leave him down there." "He's not bleeding badly," I added, although I wasn't confident. Ben climbed partway down the ladder. "Hey man, can you hear me?" No response. He crouched near the man. I stayed at the top, holding my breath. Ben checked for a pulse, then looked up. "He's alive, but barely." I stepped away from the trapdoor and scanned the cabin again. No phone, no radio. just the sounds of Ben's shoes on the concrete below. That's when I noticed the drag marks. Long streaks across the dusty floor, heading from the trapdoor to the wall, like something heavy had been pulled across. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Then I heard it, a branch snapping outside. Not the wind, not an animal, too deliberate. I turned toward the door and moved closer to the window. Through the glass, I saw a shape move between the trees. Someone was out there, watching. I stepped back and told Ben. He nodded from below. That's when the moan turned into a word. A faint "help me." We both froze. It was weak, but it was clear. We didn't wait anymore. Ben pushed the door wide open, and I held the light steady. The ladder creaked as he climbed down fully. I paused at the top, then followed. The air changed instantly, damp and cold. It was a cellar, maybe 6 feet wide each direction. No lights, no windows. The smell hit me next, blood, metallic and thick. The same smell I remembered from a highway wreck we passed when I was 16. On the floor was a man, maybe early 50s, bearded, in a camo jacket soaked near his shoulder. He was shivering. A torn shirt was tied around his arm. Ben leaned down beside him. "You okay? Can you move?" The man nodded just slightly. Tom Morgan," he whispered. "Need help." I tried calling again. Still no service. Ben checked his wound. The shirt was soaked. Blood was still seeping through. "Who did this?" I asked. Tom closed his eyes for a moment. "Dan Parker, hunting partner. Got into a fight. Said I took too much meat. He cut me, took the buck, took our phones, left me here." Ben looked at me. "We have to get him out now." We each got aside and helped Tom sit up. He groaned loudly but didn't yell. The ladder shook, but we didn't have time to be careful. Ben went first, helped pull from above while I lifted from behind. Took everything we had, but we got him up and out. The woods were quiet again, but I didn't waste time looking for whoever had been watching. We helped Tom to the SUV. He could barely stand. "I know the way," he muttered. "Hospital in Willowbrook, west on 67. "Hang in there," I said. Ben drove. I sat in the back with Tom, trying to hold his arm still. The seat belt was already soaked. He winced but stayed quiet. The road was rough and seemed to go on forever. After about half an hour, the road evened out, and we started seeing signs for Willowbrook. I switched my phone back on. 1 bar, just enough. We pulled into the emergency parking lot. Tom's head was slumped, but he was breathing. As soon as nurses saw the blood, they rushed him inside. We told them what happened. Ben called 911 from outside while I washed off at a sink near the ambulance entrance. Sheriff's deputies showed up maybe 15 minutes later. We told them everything, showed them the spot on Ben's GPS, gave them Tom's name. A few hours later, one deputy came back. "We found Dan Parker. He said he was at a tavern nearby. Still had the knife. Blood matched." "What now?" Ben asked. "If Tom makes it, he can testify. But it's already attempted murder." Tom survived. Needed surgery, a transfusion, and stayed a few weeks in the hospital. When we went back, he was sitting up, giving his statement to detectives. We didn't stay long, just long enough to know he'd make it. Months later, the DA called us. Dan pled not guilty, but they had too much: Tom's testimony, the knife, the cabin. He was found guilty, got 8. When I was 17, me and my neighbor Dylan used to check out abandoned places tucked away in the wooded hills near our little town in West Virginia. Dylan was 19 and had his own ride, a worn-out red Honda that rattled when it sat in idle. It wasn't anything fancy, but it got us where we needed to go. Most weekends, we'd grab some flashlights, throw on beat-up sneakers, and pack a few snacks before heading out. We called it exploring, even though there was nothing city-like about where we lived. Just woods, train lines, and some broken-down back roads. We'd come across old barns with sagging roofs, sheds filled with rusting tools, even a crumbling mining shack with a warped floor. Most of it wasn't anything special, the kind of stuff you'd expect in an area built on coal mining and timber. Nothing ever stood out, just cobwebs, dust, and the odd raccoon now and then. One Saturday in late September, Dylan said his cousin who did trail maintenance for the state forestry office told him about an old hunting lodge about 2 miles off a long-forgotten access road, far past the edge of the park. "No one goes out that far," Dylan said. His cousin had found it while checking motion sensor cams for deer. Said the place looked like it was built in the 80s and hadn't been touched in a long time. No signal out there, but that didn't bother us. We left around midday. The sky was gray and the air smelled like wet dirt and rotting leaves. Dylan drove up an old fire road that narrowed the deeper we got. Asphalt turned to gravel, then to packed dirt, then finally to just woods. We stopped next to a downed tree and got out. The woods were thick all around, mostly spruce, and the only sound was the breeze moving through the limbs. We grabbed our flashlights and a short crowbar Dylan had brought just in case any doors wouldn't budge. The walk took about 20 minutes. The trail was barely there, just faint impressions from tires and flattened weeds. The deeper we got, the harder it was to follow. At last, we reached a small break in the trees, a clearing maybe 15 feet across. The cabin was there, leaning a little to one side, built from solid logs, topped with a rusted tin roof layered in pine needles. One of the shutters had dropped off, and the front door was cracked open on its hinges. We stood there for a while, just staring. The place didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. No symbols, no signs of anyone being there recently, just old and forgotten, like everything else we usually found. Dylan circled around to check for other ways in. I followed, pushing past branches and ducking under low-hanging limbs. The back window was broken, most of the glass gone. I used the crowbar to scrape away what was left and climbed through. Inside, the cabin smelled of mold and old wood. Dust floated in the still air. The walls had peeling wallpaper, yellowed and curling. There was a busted couch with springs poking through, a bent folding table, and a shelf still stacked with crushed soup cans. A dirty hunting coat hung on a nail by the door. I called out that it looked clear, just old junk. Dylan waited outside by a tree, watching the woods like we always did. One person explores, the other stands guard. That was our habit. There was a wooden ladder set against the wall, leading to a small upper loft. I pressed down on the first rung. It groaned but held. I climbed slowly. The loft was barely high enough to sit upright. I swept the light across the floor. In one corner was a flattened sleeping bag, dusty and faded. Next to it sat a broken lantern and a pile of old newspapers turned yellow from age. Nothing new, nothing strange. I turned to head back down when I noticed something under the sleeping bag. A metal container not much bigger than a lunchbox. I pulled it toward me. The lid was clipped shut, not locked. I flipped it open. Inside were some Polaroid pictures, a dull pocket knife, and a folded map. Most of the photos showed trees, paths, one even had the cabin from a distance. But one stopped me cold. It was of a man standing right there in the loft. Same angle I was in, same wooden wall behind him. He had on a plaid jacket, staring right at the camera. No smile, just blank. That same wall was right behind me. Same nail, same shadow. The picture looked old, maybe a decade, but the guy's stare stuck with me. I put the photo back, closed the lid, and headed down. Dylan was still outside, slowly pacing near the tree line. He looked over when I came out and I showed him the box, told him what was inside. He shrugged. Probably just a hunter who stayed there a while back. Kinda weird, but not too crazy. I nodded, unsure. We stood around, unsure what to do next. I said we should check under the backside. Maybe there was a crawl space or something. Some of these places had stashes under the porch. Dylan agreed and walked toward the corner while I headed back toward the trail to take a leak. I stepped behind a tree and looked at the ground while I went. That's when I heard it, like gravel shifting. I turned my head slow, figuring it was Dylan, but he was still near the cabin, crouched down by the far side. The sound came again, this time closer. I zipped up and moved toward the trail, scanning the trees. There was nothing, just woods. But then I noticed something. Footprints. New ones. Deep and sharp-edged, not ours. Someone heavier. They came from the opposite direction, from deeper in the trees. Not random. Headed toward the cabin. straight lines. I knelt down to check them. Definitely not ours. I got up and went back to Dylan. He was still poking around underneath the porch with a stick. I told him quietly about what I found. He stood up fast. We both turned, staring into the trees. No one said a thing. Dylan walked over to the edge of the clearing, past where the path ended. He looked at the trees, scanned the brush, then stopped. His face changed. He pointed. "Someone's been here," he said. I joined him. The shrubs were crushed, and something blue stuck out from a pile of leaves, a bit of torn cloth. While I was flipping through old hunting magazines in the loft, I heard the front door slam shut. It wasn't wind. It was firm, clear, like someone had come in. I froze, didn't breathe. Then came the footsteps, slow, even, across the wooden floor. Not fast, not scared, just moving. I stayed still, not shifting a muscle. I pressed an ear to the floor.
No voices.
Just the thump of boots moving across the floorboards. I leaned toward a small crack in the wood and peeked through. Someone passed the couch, dark jacket, hood up. No rush, no words, just pacing. I crept toward the small loft window and peeked out. Dylan was just outside, standing stiff near the clearing. When he saw me, he waved wildly, pointing at the cabin. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear anything. Whatever he saw, it wasn't good. The sound inside didn't stop. The person was opening drawers, knocking over chairs, searching steadily. Not for food, not for shelter. They were looking for something else. That's when it hit me. They didn't come before us. They followed, maybe watched us enter. I stayed still. I didn't call out. I just listened. The noises below turned violent. Cabinets slammed. A crate crashed. Then a voice. Quiet, scratchy. Not to someone else, just talking low, like muttering. Then a pause. The ladder shifted. A weight pressed against it. Creak. Just testing it. I spun to the window. The old frame was stuck. I pushed hard. It gave a little. No time to waste. I slid my legs out, grabbed the metal drain pipe, and lowered myself. Halfway down, my foot slipped. I hit the wall hard. A voice shouted from inside. Angry. Sharp. I didn't wait. I jumped the last few feet, landed hard, and ran. Dylan was already moving. I sprinted after him, crashing through undergrowth, gasping. We didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran. The trail felt twice as long. My legs screamed. Branches whipped my arms. I expected footsteps behind us, but all I heard was the wind and our breath. When we reached the car, Dylan fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. He dropped them, picked them up, jammed them in. The engine groaned, then started. He threw it into reverse, spun around, and we tore down the road, bumping over rocks, branches scraping both sides. I looked back the whole way. Nothing followed, but I didn't stop watching. Not until the pavement came back and the bars on my phone lit up. We didn't talk. Dylan just drove. We stopped at a gas station past town. A deputy sat out front, sipping from a paper cup. We went inside. I told him what happened, where we'd been, what we saw. His face tensed up when I mentioned the cabin. Dylan showed him the pin he saved on his phone. "You kids got lucky," the deputy said. He told us a guy named Craig Benson had broken out of a state prison just a few days before. He was in for assault and burglary, escaped during a prison transport not far from the park line. They'd been searching the area, but the woods made it hard. Said Benson had been hiding in empty buildings, sneaking in when no one was around. When I was 33, I had to rebuild my life from scratch after a wreck left me with a shattered thigh bone and a heavy painkiller habit. That entire year felt like a never-ending cycle of recovery. Doctor appointments, painful stretches I could barely do, and non-stop struggles with withdrawal. My physical therapist was the one who encouraged me to try hiking. Said being outside and moving at a steady pace might help both my leg and my mind. I started small, just walking a few blocks near my place in Missoula, Montana, with a limp but a stubborn mindset to keep going. I used an app to track the distance. Even seeing 0.25 miles show up felt like something to be proud of. After a couple of weeks, I drove out to the nearby hills and tried one of the easier loops. Took me more than an hour to finish, but I didn't care. The soft ground and fallen pine needles helped me feel connected to something that wasn't pills or pain. I stuck with it. Every Saturday and Sunday I got up early and hit a trail before the heat kicked in. I'd bring a small bag with one water bottle, a few snack bars, and my phone. I didn't see too many people out there. I liked that. Just me and the path. At a local bakery I went to often, a couple of folks told me about an old fire watch cabin about 5 miles up one of the steeper trails. Said it hadn't been in use for years, but the building still stood, and the view of the valley was worth the effort. I made it my goal. Took me 3 months of gradually tougher hikes to feel like I was ready. I planned it out. Left at sunrise, checked the forecast, wore solid hiking boots, packed 2 full bottles of water, a couple granola bars, and a charged phone. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just needed to know I could do it. That morning in August was already hot by the time I hit the trailhead. The start of the hike was dusty, with some shaded patches under scrubby juniper trees. The climb turned out steeper than I thought it'd be. Around mile 2, my right leg, the one that was broken, started throbbing. I had to take breaks more often than I'd planned, stretching slowly to avoid it cramping. There weren't many markers along the way, just rocks and tough brush. The sun was brutal after 10 a.m., and sweat soaked through my shirt. I had drained both water bottles before I even spotted the top. The old cabin was still there, but it wasn't what I pictured. Smaller than I expected, built from faded wood, looking like nobody had been near it in years. The windows were boarded up, and the front door was held shut with a thick chain. No sign of a pump or any water nearby. I walked around once, hoping to see a rain barrel or container of some kind, but there was nothing. I sat on a wide rock close by, breathing hard. My mouth was bone dry and the granola bar stuck to my tongue. I tried to call a friend just to say where I was, but there was no signal at all. After a few minutes, I stood up and looked around. The air felt thin. That's when I noticed a light stream of smoke rising from somewhere farther into the woods. It was faint, but it didn't waver. Maybe a quarter mile away, just past a small dip beyond the ridge. I figured it had to be another cabin. I didn't plan to ask for much, just some water and maybe a tip about a quicker way down if one existed. I'd met a few older hikers on past trails, always generous and kind. I told myself whoever was out there would understand. Hikers usually look out for each other. Heading down toward the smoke wasn't too bad. The slope wound around a bit and was more twisty than steep. The trees grew closer together, mostly pine with some fir mixed in. The bug noise grew louder, mostly cicadas with the odd bird call. I kept my eyes on the thin path. It didn't look like a deer trail. People had clearly walked here before. Someone lived or spent time here, no question. As I moved closer, I began to hear music. Not loud, but clear enough. Sounded like some old rock song. Maybe Simple Sky by Leonard Harp or something similar. It was playing through a speaker or a radio, cutting through the trees in bits. The cabin came into view fast. 1 second it wasn't there, and the next I was almost standing in its clearing. It was tucked into an open space just big enough for the structure and an old truck parked nearby. The cabin was made of rough wood with a greenish metal roof, bent and patched in a few spots. A small chimney was letting out a thin line of smoke, and I caught the smell of burning wood. The music was louder now, playing from a little speaker near the door. The front steps gave a creak when I stepped up. I knocked once, then harder. No one answered. I waited a moment, shifting from one foot to the other, looking around the open area. Nothing moved. I called out, "Hello? I'm sorry. I just ran out of water." Still nothing. The truck had Montana tags, but they were so faded it looked like they hadn't been changed in a long time. In the back were some empty cans, mostly beer, a few crushed soda bottles. I walked around to one of the side windows, trying not to seem nosy. The curtain was halfway closed, but through the gap I could see a small table with an overflowing ashtray, a half-drunk bottle of whiskey, and crumpled papers. I didn't notice anything else at first. No movement, no people. I was trying to decide whether to knock again or just leave when I heard the floor creak. Not near the front door, but somewhere deeper inside. I froze. Then the music cut off. Not a fade, it stopped cold like someone pulled the plug. I tapped on the door again, quicker this time. "Hey, I'm not trying to be a bother, just out of water up the hill." Silence. Then another creak, this time heavier. Someone was coming toward the front room. I stepped back off the porch, about 10 feet away, keeping my hands visible. Then I heard a bolt slide. Nothing else. The door stayed closed. A low voice came from behind the wood. "You shouldn't be here." I stepped a bit closer and knocked again, this time louder. Still no response. The music came back on. A steady beat from the 70s, thick with guitar. I thought maybe the guy inside didn't hear me. I stepped to the side where the front window faced the clearing. It had been partly covered with old newspaper from the inside. The edges were yellowed and peeling. At the top corner, one strip had come loose. I leaned closer and looked in. Took a second for my eyes to adjust. Inside stood a man, middle-aged on the heavier side, wearing a red checkered shirt. He was pouring something from a red gas can onto the wooden floor. Slow and steady, like he was following instructions in his head. He didn't seem panicked. In fact, he looked calm, way too calm. Then I saw her. A woman lay crumpled in the far corner. Her body was twisted unnaturally, and a dark stain was spreading out from beneath her head. Blood. I froze. The man didn't see me. He just kept pacing slowly in circles, pouring gas in patterns across the boards. Couldn't breathe. I backed away from the glass, legs stiff, trying not to make a sound. My heartbeat was so loud it echoed in my ears. I moved carefully until I reached the trees, then turned and picked up speed, stumbling over rocks and roots. My brain felt scrambled, but one thing was clear. I had just seen a murder scene, and that guy was about to cover it up with fire. I ducked behind a thick pine, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it with trembling hands. No bars. I lifted it higher. Still nothing. I cursed and limped back to the trail, forcing myself into a jog. My leg was already aching badly, but I didn't care. I had to get low enough to catch a signal. I didn't look back. Every rustle and twig snap made me flinch. I kept going, pushing through the pain. Every couple 100 feet, I paused to check my phone. One bar blinked in, then disappeared. I kept running. Halfway down, I finally saw the signal hold steady. Barely one bar, but enough. I hit the emergency button and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice broke in and out, but I got the words out. Cabin fire, woman bleeding, off Ridgeview Trail, near old fire station. Please send help. The call dropped. I stood there gripping the phone, praying enough had gotten through. Then I ran again. I didn't stop until I saw my car. The parking lot was still empty. I jumped in and sped down the gravel road, dust flying behind me. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, ran into the front area and told the first officer I saw what happened. They didn't brush it off. One deputy led me to a side room while another passed along my report. I told them everything. Where I went, what I saw, what I heard. I gave the best directions I could. 5 miles past the fire lookout, maybe a quarter mile off a split trail near a clearing. I described the truck, the guy's flannel shirt, the gas can. They asked about the woman, and I said I wasn't sure if she was still alive, but there had been a lot of blood. They sent 2 squad cars and a fire crew up the trail. I waited there, not sure what else I could do. After 2 hours, a deputy came back. His face told me everything. The cabin had been on fire when they got there. Thanks to my tip, they got it under control fast. The man, Robert Kincaid, had shot himself before they arrived. His wife, Dana Kincaid, was already gone. So when I turned 22, my father, Mark, arranged a week-long trip for our family at Birch Lake in northern Minnesota. We booked a small lodge tucked deep in the forest, around a 45-minute drive from the closest town. It was squeezed between tall pines that blocked out most of the sky and seemed to stretch forever upward. My younger brother, Liam, who was 11 then, couldn't stop talking the whole ride there, already asking about places to fish and if we'd spot any wildlife. I packed a couple of novels and my half-charged e-reader, planning on doing as little as I could. Final exams had just wrapped up and I wanted some peace. My dad was mainly glad to get out of the city. His hair had turned completely silver that year, and I hadn't seen him smile much since the breakup. This getaway was his way of fixing things. The cabin was pretty simple. Stone chimney, hardwood floors, 2 small bedrooms, a basic kitchen, and a deck facing the water. No internet, barely any reception. There was a canoe turned over beside the shed, a barbecue grill, and a pile of split logs stacked near the steps. The first day went well. We got our stuff settled and took a swim. The lake water was chilly but clear. Liam caught a little perch using a worm on his 3rd try, and Dad helped him take the hook out. I stayed on the deck with my feet up, trying to finish the end of a book I barely remembered starting. We grilled some burgers, played a few card games, and watched the sun drop below the tree line across the lake. That night was quiet. No traffic, no horns, just frogs, insects, and that strange peaceful hum that comes with being far away from everything. I fell asleep early. The second day was similar. We paddled the canoe around midday. Dad and Liam fished while I leaned back, using my cap to shade my eyes. By late afternoon, we came back, and Liam cleaned the trout he'd caught in the sink as Dad showed him how to open the belly without wrecking the meat. I packed away the tackle and started stacking wood by the dock, thinking I'd light a fire later. Dinner was outdoors again. Pasta this time. Dad cracked open a beer. I remember thinking he looked exhausted but not as stiff. He laughed for the first time all trip when Liam dropped his fork and it bounced off the deck into the weeds. It was small, but it felt real. After sunset, I headed down to the dock by myself. I took the lighter, some dry twigs, and a blanket. The fire caught quickly and gave off enough heat. I had a hoodie on, sitting cross-legged, watching the tiny sparks float up. It was quiet again, the sky filled with stars you never see from town. I stayed like that maybe a half hour, not really thinking of anything. Around 9 p.m., I heard something. It came from the forest behind the cabin, up the hill beyond the thick trees. At first, I figured it was just a branch dropping or some animal, but it kept going. A hard, dull thump, like wood hitting wood. Not quick, but steady. Thump, thump, thump. I froze and listened. It didn't stop, kept going every few seconds. It sounded exactly like someone chopping logs. Not a chainsaw, not random, just solid and slow. It struck me as strange because our lodge was the only one on this side of the lake. There was another cabin maybe half a mile down around a curve, but we hadn't seen any smoke or boats from that way. I assumed it might be someone we hadn't noticed yet, maybe getting a fire ready late. The sound traveled so clearly over the water and between the trees, it was tough to tell how far away it was. Still, it wasn't frantic or rushed, just steady and weirdly calm. I poked the flames with a stick and watched the colors shift. Then I toasted one marshmallow even though I wasn't really hungry. Caught fire on one side and slid off the stick. Eventually, the chopping stopped, just cut off. 1 second it was there, the next gone. I waited, half thinking it'd start again. Didn't. I stood, poured the rest of my water on the fire, and watched the steam hiss. The air had turned colder, damp with the breeze off the lake. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and started walking toward the cabin. My socks soaked through from the wet grass. I had already put out the fire and headed inside. But something about the quiet felt different. The usual night sounds, frogs, crickets, even the occasional owl, felt muted. Not gone, but dulled, like the woods were holding their breath. I paused at the porch steps and looked back at the tree line. Nothing there, just the dark outlines of pines and the dock at the edge of the water. Inside, the lights made everything feel tighter, almost too bright. Dad and Liam were at the kitchen table putting dishes away. I told Dad about the chopping sound. He nodded but didn't look up. Said something like, probably just a local cutting firewood. Folks around here do it year-round. I didn't press. He didn't act worried. I showered quick, changed into sweatpants, and lay down on the couch with a blanket while Liam flicked his flashlight in the bedroom. Around 10 p.m., I was half asleep when a sound came. Not a light one this time. Heavy steps crushing dry leaves and gravel. Slow, dragging steps, Then a knock. No, a pounding. Loud enough to rattle the windows. Not a single hit either. Several hard slams. The kind of banging that jolts your heart awake before your brain catches up. I sat up and saw Dad already at the front window, peeking through the curtain. He stayed still for a few seconds. I joined him. A man stood on our porch, tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders. He wore a plaid jacket, jeans, and thick gloves. In his right hand was a chopping axe. Long wooden handle. The blade looked shiny and new, like it had just been sharpened. His face was partly hidden under the porch light, but what I could see didn't look drunk or confused. He looked focused. His body was tense, shoulders pushed forward like he was ready to swing. He didn't talk at first, just kept slamming his fist against the door. Then, in a low voice that cracked and dragged, he said something we couldn't catch. Then louder, "Open the door." His voice didn't slur like someone drunk. It sounded more like someone barely keeping their cool. Dad grabbed his phone and hurried into the hallway. "No reception," he said, holding it up. I tried mine. Same thing. One blinking bar, then gone. The pounding went on. Then he started yelling. Still not clear words, just mad sounds, like someone yelling through clenched teeth. Then he lifted the axe, brought it down hard right in the center of the door. The sound was awful. A sharp crack, followed by the slow groan of wood breaking. He raised it again and struck just under the first hit. The door shook. Paint flaked off the frame. Dad called for Liam, and we all ran into the back bedroom. That window faced the woods and sometimes got a bit of signal if you held your phone high enough. Dad stood near it, pacing, holding his phone up like an antenna. "Got one bar, hold on," he said. Then finally, "Yes, I need help. A man with an axe is trying to break into our cabin. We're at Birch Lake, cabin number 4. Please get someone here fast." He gave the dispatcher the name of the road and directions from a nearby gas station. I heard the voice on the other end say it would be at least 20 minutes before an officer could reach us. The banging outside stopped. Just silence. Then we heard movement. Leaves and gravel crunching as he walked around the side of the house. He was circling. We stayed down. Dad turned the bedroom light off. I crouched under the window and listened. The kitchen door handle jiggled. Metal scraped against metal. Then the window over the sink groaned like something pushed against it. Maybe his gloves. Maybe the axe. He didn't speak again, just tested every entry. Rough, forceful. The back door creaked twice. Then 3 quick hits. The axe again. Each swing followed by a grunt. Then stillness. Long, drawn-out stillness. 5 minutes passed. 10. Still no sirens. Still no headlights. Then, finally, we heard tires rolling over the gravel road. Red and blue lights flickered behind the trees. A lone sheriff's SUV rolled slowly up the drive. The man was gone. The officer stepped out. Late 50s, thick vest, one hand resting near his holster. He checked the area, then walked up to the door. "Everyone okay?" he asked. We nodded. He circled the place with his flashlight, then returned to look at the front door. The axe strikes had left deep cuts, 2 wide gouges in the wood. Same with the back. He whistled softly and said, "Yep, that's him." Dad asked, "Who?" "Don Reed," the deputy said. "Used to be a logger up near Hollow Creek. Got canned for drinking on the job. Lives deep in the woods now. Gets real protective over this area. Thinks he still owns parts of the land, even the rented cabins." He crouched and touched the split in the doorframe. "This isn't the first one. 3 other cabins in the last month. Same deal. No injuries yet." He said Don usually slips away before anyone catches him. Some years back, maybe 6 or 7, my friend Mason and I decided to go on a day hike out near Blackthorn Ridge, which is a few hours drive from where I live now in a quiet little place called Milford in northern Vermont. We'd heard about this old, unmarked path from a regional hiking group online, and it seemed remote enough to be fun, but still manageable for 2 people who knew their way around the woods pretty well. Neither of us had ever been on that particular stretch before, but we both had experience with backcountry treks. I brought along a waterproof topographic map and had a GPS app saved for offline use, just to be safe. We pulled in a little before 10 a.m. It was brisk, maybe in the mid-50s, and the air had that familiar mix of pine needles and faint smoke that always reminds me of late fall. Probably someone nearby burning yard debris or getting a fire going. Made the whole forest smell like an old wood-burning stove. I parked my beat-up Cherokee on a narrow dirt turnout that barely passed for a roadside pull-in. We packed light. Just lunch, water, emergency blankets, the usual stuff. My hiking boots were still a little stiff from a recent waterproof coating, but I figured they'd loosen up fast. Mason got his trekking poles adjusted, and we headed in. The path, if it could even be called one, twisted through thick clusters of maple and spruce. The sunlight broke through the tree cover in warm, patchy beams. For a while, it had that calm, peaceful feel of a hike where nothing could really go wrong. The trail markers were nearly faded away, just small smudges of off-white paint on random tree trunks, and they were spaced out way too far. Sometimes we'd walk a good stretch without seeing any, then spot a couple close together. We kept second-guessing our direction, but it more or less lined up with the map, so we pushed forward. Eventually, the trail disappeared almost completely. We were stepping over roots and pushing through thick brush more than following any kind of path. Still, we weren't too concerned. I had the GPS tracking our route with a breadcrumb trail, and my phone battery was good for the day. But around noon, I checked the time and realized we hadn't seen a marker in what felt like ages. That's when I started to wonder if we'd accidentally crossed onto private property. There are a lot of old homes and cabins out there that back right up to the woods. Even if there aren't fences, folks in those parts often don't like strangers wandering through. I was just about to bring it up when Mason came to a stop and said, "Hey, look!" Down the slope, maybe 200 feet away, partly hidden by trees and brush, was a tiny old shack. The kind of place that might have belonged to a hunter decades ago and just got left behind. It looked deserted, really deserted. The roof was sagging badly on one side, and the last of the paint had long since peeled away. There was no visible trail leading to it, just rocks and thick undergrowth. We both knew it probably wasn't the smartest idea, but curiosity got the better of us. We made our way down slowly, brushing branches aside and stepping over fallen limbs. The closer we got, the worse it looked. The front step creaked loudly under our weight, and one of the floorboards on the porch gave a little under my boot. We stepped into what had once been the front door. The door itself was half off the hinges, leaning awkwardly. We paused inside for a second to let our eyes adjust to the dim light. It was dark, except for beams of sun coming in through a few cracked windows. The air hit us hard, damp, musty, and something else I still can't quite describe. Mold and rot, sure, but there was another scent mixed in that was just wrong. Inside, it looked like no one had been in there for at least 10 years. In one corner, there were shelves lined with glass jars filled with some thick yellow liquid. Could have been anything, urine, maybe, or something even weirder. I didn't get close enough to figure it out. In the center of the room was a small table with a pile of old magazines, probably from the early 90s. The pages were curled, stained, and crumbling. But the part that really got to me was the photos. Someone had gone through every magazine and carefully scratched out or cut out the eyes of every single person in every image. Not just torn pages, neatly removed or scratched out eyes. It didn't matter if it was a model, a celebrity, or someone in a news photo. It felt too specific to be just accidental damage. Mason tried to act like it was some prank, maybe something local teens set up to scare hikers. An abandoned cabin made into a creepy art project. But to me, it felt different. Felt dirty, personal, and then the smell hit us. It was like something dead had been sitting there for too long, thick and foul in a way that almost made me gag. We looked around to see if maybe something had crawled under the floor and died, but there wasn't anything obvious. Honestly, I didn't want to dig around too much to find out. We didn't stay long, maybe 7 or 8 minutes at most, just long enough to be fully creeped out. It wasn't even that late, probably around 1:30, but we decided to call it early. Neither of us had packed for a night out, and the feeling had changed. It wasn't just being off course anymore. It felt like something straight out of a bad horror flick. We started hiking back, trying to retrace our steps. This time, we moved faster, with less talking and more attention on the trail. Then, maybe 15 minutes away from the cabin, we saw someone. A man came walking in from the direction we were heading out of. Right away, something felt off. No pack, no water, no gear of any kind. Just a sweatshirt, jeans, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. Way underdressed for where we were. He gave us this smile that didn't reach his eyes and said something like, "Beautiful day for a hike, huh?" His tone was flat, weirdly calm. We nodded, mumbled something about heading back, and kept walking. Neither of us said a thing until we were a good 100 feet down the trail. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him behind us, but he just kept walking slowly toward where we had just come from. We made it back to the Jeep faster than I thought possible. What stuck with me was that there weren't any other vehicles anywhere. Ours was still the only one parked there. No bikes, no tire marks, no sign of anyone else. I still don't know how that guy got out there. Maybe he was staying in that rotting shack. Or maybe he just wandered through. Either way, I'm just glad we didn't meet him while we were still inside. A few years back, my boyfriend and I set up a little trip to this old hunting cabin that used to be my granddad's. It's tucked way out in the woods of northern Mississippi, about an hour outside a tiny town called Brookvale. If you've ever been through that region, you know cell reception drops out before you even hit the last gas station. We packed the night before. Snacks, clothes, a cooler full of food, even a stack of old DVDs. We were planning to leave before the sun came up, though honestly, I don't think either of us slept more than an hour. We were too excited. The drive was smooth, mostly quiet roads with pretty views. When we got to Brookvale, we stopped at a local market to grab a few fresh things. Eggs, bread, basic stuff. After that, it was another long hour into the woods. The road went from blacktop to gravel, then turned into plain dirt. No signs, no lights, just thick woods and a narrow trail. I'd forgotten how far out this place really was. Must have been at least 50 miles from anything close to civilization. It honestly gave me the creeps, even with the sun still up. By the time we got there, we were wiped. The cabin was small. A single bedroom with squeaky floors, an old stone fireplace, and furniture that smelled like dust and pine. We unloaded the truck, brought the food inside, and got dinner going. My boyfriend, let's call him Kyle, said he was going to chop a bit of firewood out back while I threw together a pot of chili. By 7, the sun was already sinking behind the trees. We made sure all the doors and windows were shut tight. Only had 2 doors and maybe 5 windows total, so it didn't take long. We didn't want to spook ourselves too much, so we put on a copy of Catch Me If You Can. Just something light to take our minds off the fact we were out in the middle of nowhere. After we got settled, I reached for a cigarette and realized the pack was empty. I asked Kyle where the rest were, and he said the rest of the carton was still in the bed of the truck. He offered to get them, but I said, "No, I'll grab it. The thing is, I've always hated the dark. Ever since I was a little kid, it's made my skin crawl. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's just how I am." Before I stepped outside, I asked Kyle to stand in the front doorway so I could see him the whole time. He chuckled but said sure. I slipped on my shoes and went down the steps toward the truck. I lifted the bed cover and reached for the carton and just froze. There was a sound coming from the trees, a horrible sound. At first, it kind of sounded like a woman screaming, but then it changed, slid into this deep, drawn-out howl, and then got even worse. It twisted into something that didn't sound like a person or an animal. It was like a nightmare come to life through sound. I ran for the cabin, heart thudding in my chest. Kyle was still standing at the door, staring into the woods. His face looked like all the blood had drained out of it. I shoved him inside and slammed the door shut. "What the hell was that?" I asked, breathing hard. He just stared for a few seconds before shaking his head. "I don't know," he said. "I've been camping and hunting with my uncle since I was 10. I've heard coyotes, foxes, owls, even bobcats, but nothing like that." I told him it didn't sound right, not like anything I'd ever heard. Then we heard it again, that same noise, a twisted mix of a scream and a growl, but this time it came from just outside the living room window. It was so close. Kyle didn't waste a second. He ran for the back bedroom to grab his Glock. I opened the coat closet and took out my granddad's old bolt-action rifle. I'd held it a bunch of times growing up, but never like that. Not with my hands shaking and my heart ready to jump out of my chest. I didn't know what was out there or what it wanted, but my brain went straight into survival mode. I was stiff with fear, but ready. Then it came again, louder, right at the front door. I aimed the rifle at the door, standing about 6 feet back. My arms were trembling so bad I could barely aim. I'm 52, barely over 100 pounds, but in that moment I was ready to shoot whatever was out there. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the sound suddenly jumped to the kitchen window. That's when I let out a real scream, loud and raw, like it got dragged out of me without thinking. Kyle was back beside me with his pistol. We backed up into the hallway so we could see both sides of the cabin. Then we heard a nasty crunching noise, like metal being twisted and ripped apart. Neither of us could move. We were frozen, just standing there, waiting for something to break through a wall or window or the roof. It felt like hours, but it was probably just a little over an hour. Eventually, everything went silent. No more noises, no steps, nothing. We slowly crept to the kitchen window. Kyle looked first. He's taller than me and said, "Holy hell," tore into the truck. My stomach dropped. I leaned over to see. There was a giant hole punched right through the back door of the truck. It looked like something huge had slammed into it. We ran around the cabin, checking every lock again. Kyle even shoved a dresser in front of one of the doors. Neither of us slept. We sat on the floor all night, holding our guns, eyes stuck to the windows, ears on high alert for any little creak or thump. When daylight started to come, we finally decided to check the truck. Kyle went first, pistol ready. I followed close behind with the rifle. It was worse up close. Deep claw marks ran from the tail light all the way to the passenger door. And that hole, it was like something had smashed right through the metal. I've seen what wild pigs and black bears can do, but nothing like that. We got on the emergency radio in the cabin and called the local ranger station. Took them nearly 3 hours to send someone out. The ranger looked exhausted. When he saw the truck, he went quiet, then finally said, "You two are lucky. In the past 6 months, at least a dozen people have gone missing around here. No sign of them. Nothing." He told us a few farms nearby had reported the same kind of howls and screeches. Then he said something that really rattled me. Some farms had animals go missing overnight. Others found them the next day, but not alive. And not whole either. He looked nervous. He told us flat out we needed to leave until they could figure out what was happening. He said he'd stay until we packed and follow us to the main road. He clearly didn't want to stay there either. We didn't argue, just stuffed everything into the truck. Didn't fold anything, didn't pack right, just threw it all in, slammed the tailgate, and tore off down that dirt road like something was chasing us. Once we hit real pavement, we pulled over just long enough to thank the ranger. Then we kept driving. As far as I know, nobody has ever caught or seen whatever it was. No pictures, no answers, nothing. I don't even want to know what it was. We've never gone back, and we never will. Whatever it was, no animal I've ever heard of makes those noises, or punches a hole through a truck door like it's made of cardboard. Not even close. The sun was starting to drop behind the hills as me and Jenna drove through this tiny spot in northern Arizona. We were just passing through on the way to an old cabin we'd booked for the weekend. One of those no phones, no distractions kind of escapes. As we rolled past these small, quiet homes, I caught something strange. Not a single house had its lights on. And I don't mean like a few were dark because people went to bed. I mean completely black, like the whole town had cleared out. It was around 8:15 p.m. Still summer, still warm, still just enough light in the sky to make it feel off. Jenna made a dumb joke about the town shutting down early or being part of some creepy group, and we both sort of laughed, but I could tell we were both unsettled. Anyway, the drive out to the place wound through some old fields and overgrown dirt paths. Took a bit before we finally made it there. The cabin was tucked back in the trees, sitting under a tall ridge made of gray rock. By the time we pulled in, it was basically night. The trees around it made it feel even darker. The cabin looked like it had been sitting there for 100 years. Faded wood siding, a crooked little porch, and just one tiny window in front. We used the code on the key box, unlocked the door, and started pulling our things out of the car. Jenna wanted to get a fire going since the place didn't have heat, just an old rusty stove. I grabbed the flashlight and walked to a small shack beside the cabin where the wood was stored. It was packed with logs, but when I picked up the axe to chop kindling, the handle was split clean through. Useless, so I just dragged a few thinner logs to the front steps and left them in the bin. We both needed to use the bathroom before bed, but the cabin didn't have one. We had to cross the road to a mostly empty campground. It had these ancient cement bathroom stalls that looked like nobody had cleaned them in forever. The only other people around were way off in an RV. No lights, no sounds. Felt like we were alone. Honestly, the whole thing gave me the creeps. We hurried back after brushing our teeth, locked the door behind us, and climbed into our sleeping bags. The bunks were old and loud, but I didn't care. I was beat. I usually fall asleep fast but wake up if a mouse sneezes. So when Jenna leaned over from the bunk above and whispered, "I think someone's outside," I was wide awake in a second. I could hear it too. Quiet steps or leaves being stepped on, and then, faintly, the sound of someone trying the car door handle. The car was right outside. I held my breath. Jenna whispered again, a little more nervous this time, saying she thought the firewood bin was being opened. At first I figured it might be the people from the RV coming over to take a few logs. It wouldn't be the first time someone did that, but the sounds kept going. They moved around the whole cabin. We heard metal scraping, like someone dragging a sheet of tin or crunching up a can. Then I wondered, did I lock the woodshed? The worst part was that the cabin had these thick shutters over the windows, locked from the outside. So there was no way to look out. None. We weren't opening that door. Not a chance. We just stayed frozen there, whispering back and forth, trying to guess what was out there. Eventually, I think our bodies gave out from being too tense. We just drifted off. Not a good sleep, more like passing out from fear. When daylight finally came, we didn't say much. Just got dressed in silence, both expecting to find the car wrecked or all the firewood gone. I took a deep breath before stepping out, kind of bracing to see something messed up like axe marks on the door. But there was nothing. Everything looked untouched. The wood bin was still full. The shed was still locked tight. And the dirt around the place didn't even have any footprints except ours. Even the small red gas can was exactly where I left it. In the sunlight, it all felt too normal, like we'd just imagined it. That day, we hiked a few of the short trails behind the ridge, found a dry creek bed, and even spotted some deer way out in the trees. We kept trying to laugh off the night before, tried telling ourselves it was probably just raccoons or some animals messing with us. Maybe we were just too tired and our minds played tricks. When we got back that evening, we started going back and forth about the shutters. I kind of wanted to unlock them just to be able to see, but Jenna wasn't having it. She said if something was out there again, she'd rather not look it in the face. Hard to argue with that, so we left them locked and tried to relax. This time we did manage to get a small fire going, which made it feel a little cozier. But the second we turned the deadbolt, the tension came right back. Couldn't sleep at all. I just lay there listening, and it didn't take long before it started again. This time louder, way louder. Not just leaves or soft steps. It was something running, fast, back and forth on the roof. Me and Jenna just stared at each other, trying not to laugh from pure nervous energy. It was wild, like little creatures stomping around and throwing stuff. Then came this dragging sound, like someone pulling something huge across the porch. A chain, a tree branch, a person? I had no clue. The scariest part was the sound of metal tapping slowly above one of the windows. Metal on metal. We both heard it. Jenna mouthed the words, "Is that the lock?" I nodded. Whatever it was, it had to be tall or climbing because those shutters were at least 7 feet up. I couldn't even reach them without a chair. We didn't make a sound. Didn't even breathe heavy. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. Every creak in the wood felt like it echoed through my skull. Eventually, the sounds died down, But we didn't sleep for a long time. Next morning, we packed our stuff faster than I thought possible. Rolled up the sleeping bags, shoved everything in the trunk, and didn't even bother with breakfast. We stepped outside half expecting to see claw marks on the siding or broken tree limbs. But nothing. Not one clue that anything had been near us. Just wet grass and a breeze. That's it. Still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. Safe to say, we're not booking that weird old place again. I'm 26 now, but this happened when I was around 12. That summer, my parents figured we could use a little break. So they took me and my younger brother, Aaron, to this cabin in the woods. It belonged to my mom's cousin, who had owned it for a few years but barely ever went up there. It was tucked out near the hills in northern Montana, pretty far out, and about a 5.5-hour drive from our house in a neighborhood outside Carson City. We left after school on a Thursday afternoon, threw our bags and some food coolers into my dad's old work truck. He did maintenance for a tree service and could always use their big Ford. I remember the whole way up I was buzzing with excitement. We didn't get there until close to sundown, and it was already getting dark under the thick trees. The cabin looked like something straight out of a camping brochure. It sat in a small clearing with dense forest wrapped all the way around it. The outside was dark wood, and the porch had an old swing that squeaked when you sat on it. I claimed it right away. Inside, the whole place was just one big room that had been split up a bit. There was a tiny kitchen in one corner with some dusty pots, a sitting space with a worn-out couch, and a fireplace that hadn't seen firewood in a long time. In the back was a double bed where my parents would sleep. A short stairway led to a loft where Aaron and I would stay. The loft had a round window that looked out at the gravel driveway, and I loved it right away. It felt kind of like a lookout tower or something. After we brought everything inside and ate some instant noodles, my parents told us it was time to get ready for bed. Aaron was out in minutes. He was 9 then and could fall asleep anywhere, no matter what. I've never been like that. Still can't fall asleep easily in new places. I just lay there with a thin blanket over me, staring up at the wood-paneled ceiling. I could hear my parents talking in low voices below, but I couldn't make out their words. Their voices blended with the steady ticking of an old wall clock. I thought about trying to listen in, but I didn't have the energy. I figured it was just grown-up stuff, bills or something. Then, just after midnight, something strange happened. A knock came at the front door. Not loud, but definitely real. I froze. That kind of knock didn't belong in the woods that late at night. I heard my dad get up and walk toward it. My mom said something softly, but I couldn't hear what. I scooted carefully to the edge of the loft, trying not to make a sound, and looked down. I watched my dad walk toward the door and peek through the little window beside it. He didn't open it right away. I held my breath. Then, maybe 10 seconds later, there was another knock. This time louder, quicker, like someone losing patience. Without saying anything, my dad cracked the door just enough to squeeze out and stepped outside, pulling it shut behind him. My mom started pacing slowly in these anxious little circles near the fireplace, wringing her hands like she had no idea what to do next. Her face looked pale and tight, like she was waiting for something bad to happen. I was frozen in the loft, heart pounding but still stupidly curious. I crawled on my stomach over to that round window to try and see what was going on outside. Down the curving driveway, I saw 2 trucks that didn't belong to us. Both had their headlights on, cutting straight through the trees and lighting up the dark. I squinted through the brightness and could make out 3, maybe 4 people standing near them. One of them was clearly holding a gun, not strapped on their back, but holding it like they were ready to use it. As soon as I saw the weapon, I slid back and ducked under my blanket like that could protect me. I put my hands over my ears, trying to block everything out, but it didn't help. Even through my fingers, I still heard the front door open, then close again. I peeked over the edge of the loft once more, heart pounding so hard I could hear it. It was just my dad coming back inside. I saw him and my mom talking again in fast, hushed tones. I couldn't catch all of it, but I heard him say something like, "We'll go first thing." That was enough to tell me my gut feeling was right. Something was very wrong. The next morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My stomach was twisted in knots. We didn't even have our usual breakfast. Just grabbed a few things and sat around the table while my dad said we were packing up. His voice was calm, but serious, and that somehow made it worse. Aaron, who had slept through everything, complained about leaving so early. I kept quiet. I already knew better than to ask questions when Dad had that expression. I wanted to ask what had really happened outside, but he shut it down quick. Just said, "We're going." No talking about it. That was how he was. Once he made up his mind, that was the end of it. So we packed our stuff, loaded up the truck, and got out of there fast. No goodbye to the cabin, no last swing on the porch. Nothing. Just silence, the sound of the truck, and this tight, uneasy feeling in my chest like we were running from something we weren't supposed to witness. We never went back. Not once. Even now, years later, that night still comes back to me. Sometimes it pops into my head for no reason, especially when I'm in a quiet place or see trucks parked where they shouldn't be. I've asked my dad about it a couple of times since I got older, but he always brushes me off or changes the topic. My mom does the same. Total silence. But here's what I do know now. The cousin who owned the place, he got busted not long after that for running drugs. Turns out he'd been using the cabin as a hiding place. When things got messy, he took the blame and did a couple of years behind bars. The government took over the property after that, and that was the end of it. So yeah, putting it all together, I don't think those guys were looking for us. They were probably expecting him. Maybe thought he was hiding there or owed them something. Whatever the deal was, we got incredibly lucky that night. A lot of families wouldn't have made it out of something like that.